Some individuals are extremely cruel, exhibiting bloodlust and pleasure in inflicting pain, traits rarely seen even in animals. This extreme cruelty can consume their minds, making it difficult for them to recognize their humanity. One day, in the middle of the night, a house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters rushed in, and what they discovered was horrifying. A body so burned that the gender could not be determined, with a kitchen knife stuck in its face. This is not just a murder case, but a tragedy of kindness betrayed. A testament to the horrifying cruelty of some people. On March 24, 2006, a resident of Louisville, Kentucky, called 911 to report a house fire on Harlan Street. Several neighbors watched in horror as the flames devoured the wooden structure. They prayed for the firefighters to arrive quickly. Fearing the fire would spread, the incident occurred around midnight, and rescuers immediately responded. The firefighters battled the raging blaze, taking nearly 45 minutes to bring it under control. Afterwards, they began searching for the fire's source. However, they found something horrible: a dead body. The fire department immediately called forensic experts and detectives. By this time, the house was almost half destroyed by the fire, and everything inside was smoke-filled, making it difficult to breathe or begin work. In the bedroom, police found the victim's body lying face up. The fire had so severely damaged it that even the gender couldn't be determined without an examination. However, some things were immediately obvious. Suspicions of accidental death were quickly dismissed, as the victim had been stabbed in the face with a knife. Forensic experts were astounded because sticking a knife into someone's face requires significant force. This was a unique case for everyone involved, speaking volumes about the extreme cruelty involved. It was clearly a murder. The fire had obviously started in the bedroom where the body was found. The attacker wasn't just trying to kill his victim, he clearly wanted to destroy all evidence. No identification documents were found. All photographs and documents had burned. Detectives checked the mailbox outside, but found it empty. The remains were prepared to be sent to the laboratory. When the forensic expert removed the bladed weapon from the deceased's face, it turned out to be a regular kitchen knife, not a hunting weapon or a combat tool. It was assumed that the knife had been taken from the victim's kitchen. This immediately ruled out the possibility of a break-in or robbery gone wrong. Everything suggested the murder was committed in a fit of rage, perhaps driven by jealousy or revenge. Given the absence of forced entry, it was definitely someone the victim knew. The police began interviewing everyone who lived near the scene. When the fire brigade arrived, many people came out onto the street to see what was happening. Among them was Daryl Benzel, who was standing next to the woman who had called 911 that night. Daryl clearly had some connection to the house. When asked if he knew who might be inside, Daryl confidently said it could be the tenant, a 40-year-old man named Charles Eddie Pointer. It was discovered that the deceased was originally from the Catholic community of Edmonton, Kentucky. He had been married and had a daughter, but, after a divorce, decided to start a new life in Louisville in the late 90s. He looked for a job, built a career, and perhaps started a family. Initially, adapting to the new community proved difficult, and Eddie developed an alcohol addiction. Despite this, he remained a calm and polite person, simply trying to find his place in life. In the new place, Eddie found a job and resolved to get his life back on track. It wasn't easy, but he sincerely believed he was on the path to recovery. Seeking understanding and support, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous. It was here that he finally found what he had been looking for: a community of people with similar problems actively supporting each other. He made new friends within the group and dedicated himself to changing his life. When Eddie needed to find new housing, he met Daryl Benzel. By this time, he had been sober for several months. Eddie hoped to secure housing and continue building his new life, and this acquaintance seemed perfectly timed. Eddie fit in well with the local community, and the landlord was very pleased with the new tenant. Eddie was friendly and caused no problems. Unfortunately, this peaceful period lasted only 8 months. And then, Eddie's body was found in a burned-down house, a knife impaled in his face, driven into the hilt. Only after many hours of inspecting the scene did the forensic scientist discover a partially burnt notebook among the ashes. On one page were several entries, including the name Jennifer Smith. Though the phone number was illegible, this name was common, making it difficult for detectives to check every Jennifer Smith. Furthermore, it was unclear in which direction to focus the investigation. The notebook appeared to be the only potential lead from the house. As everything else was destroyed, no fingerprints or other traces were found, not even on the knife handle. Naturally, investigators began by examining Eddie's immediate circle and located the Jennifer Smith, who was mentioned in the notebook. An unlikely connection emerged, given the 20-year age difference between them. From the outset, something felt amiss. They attempted to contact Jennifer, but she was out of town. Eddie's relatives were notified, a necessary step to gather information about his life and relationships. There was a critical lack of information. For Eddie's parents, this news was devastating. She insisted he had no mental illness and had always avoided criminals. She mentioned his many friends, particularly those from Alcoholics Anonymous, suggesting a possible lead. Initially, the murder appeared to be the result of a failed romance or a love triangle. However, upon closer examination of Eddie's acquaintances, it became clear they didn't fit the profile of brutal criminals. They shared similar characteristics and mentalities with Eddie, a close-knit and supportive group of people. The idea that any of them would commit such a violent act seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the autopsy revealed numerous stab wounds on Eddie's face and body. Given the severity of the burns, even a simple count was difficult. It was obvious that the attack was particularly cruel. With dozens of blows inflicted mainly on the upper body and neck, many defensive wounds were found on his hands, suggesting a long and fierce struggle for his life. Judging by the burn patterns, the fire likely started around the body, or Eddie was set on fire. Rumors about the tragic death were spreading among neighbors. The image of the crime scene was horrifying. The local community was alarmed because Eddie lived in one of the safest areas of the city. Many families with children were now afraid to leave their homes. People put pressure on the police, demanding that the streets be made safe. When Eddie's friends heard about the murder, they also went to the police station, hoping to help find the killer. They were all shocked by the brutality of the attack and the choice of victim. No one among the witnesses could identify a motive for such a death. Eddie didn't seem like someone who would deserve such a fate. The situation changed somewhat when the police received a call from Perry, the deceased's friend. According to Perry, in the last months of his life, Eddie regularly visited small bars near downtown Louisville. He had started drinking more and usually had a good time. Perry also said that during this period, Eddie wasn't in a committed relationship, but he maintained a large circle of close friends. Everyone loved him. So Perry couldn't suggest a likely suspect, but he knew a person who could potentially help the police, which was an elderly man named Blaine Thacker. Both worked in restaurants. The age difference between them was 30 years. And despite the age gap, they quickly became close friends. Perry suggested that if the police wanted valuable information, they should talk to Blaine, as he was Eddie's closest friend at the time of his death. Shortly before these events, Blaine had moved to an apartment building in Louisville. However, Perry didn't have Blaine's phone number or exact address, making it difficult to contact Blaine. Perry promised to ask Eddie's other friends to find out this information. At the time, Blaine's current place of work was also unknown, so detectives decided to start by trying to find that out. As it turned out, Blaine worked as a chef for a catering company. He is described as hot-tempered with his employees but also caring. People spoke very highly of him, describing him as a hard worker, professional, and a good-natured elderly man. He was reliable and always arrived at the restaurant first, around 4 a.m., and immediately began preparing for the kitchen's opening. However, after the tragic fire, Blaine suddenly disappeared and stopped showing up for work. No one could reach him. This seemed strange, as Blaine's reputation was impeccable. He was so punctual that everyone assumed he had a good reason for his absence. His absence the following day heightened suspicions, leading his colleagues to fear the worst. When the detectives learned this information, they were extremely worried. Eddie had been found stabbed to death in a burnt-out house, and Blaine hadn't shown up for work for 2 days. This could mean two things: either Blaine was involved in the crime and was on the run, or he was another victim of a brutal killer. Unfortunately, no one at the restaurant knew where his new apartment was located, so the search reached another dead end. Unexpectedly, just a few days after the crime, a suspicious car appeared near the burnt house. Forensic experts were still working at the scene when they saw a car pull into the driveway. The driver watched what was happening for some time and attracted attention, then even tried to enter the house, claiming he wanted to find his friend, Dale Moneypenny. An unexpected witness came forward, reporting that on the day of the murder, he had seen Dale covered in blood, accompanied by a girl who was also bloodied and appeared frightened. Now, seeing the house burnt down and surrounded by police tape, the witness suspected Dale's involvement. He didn't know the girl with Dale, but was certain the couple had been in the house for at least several days before the arson. Following this information, the search for Blaine Thacker was suspended. Detectives prioritized the new lead and began searching for Dale and his mysterious companion, who automatically became prime suspects in the brutal massacre and arson. Information on Dale was scarce, but records showed prior convictions. He was described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. Born in Schlen, Kent, he drove a black Honda, the license plate of which investigators were able to obtain, greatly simplifying the search. A warning was issued to all city law enforcement agencies, instructing them to track down Dale's vehicle. City residents were also notified through the media about the potential danger he posed. The public was asked to report any sightings of the black Honda or Dale himself to the police. However, this didn't immediately boost the investigation. Dale had served several years in prison, a significant term considering he was barely 20 at the time of the events. His crimes included violent offenses, but most were robberies. He frequently broke into houses and sold the stolen goods, living off the proceeds. He also faced several charges for illegal substance use. Seeking the primary suspect, detectives turned to Dale's family. Relatives stated they hadn't seen him in a long time, but none were surprised the police were looking for him. Dale had always been a troublemaker, constantly facing problems with the law. His downward spiral began after the tragic murder of his mother during his teenage years. He took the loss very hard, withdrawing and becoming cruel. Dale's mother was a single mother, so her death left him to fend for himself. During this period, he became addicted to partying and became somewhat of a ladies' man, easily finding new acquaintances, including women. Despite his illegal activities due to his charm, Dale's criminal history was significantly influenced by his upbringing, which involved marginalization, alcohol, and banned substance use. His problems were worsened by his quick temper and inability to take no for an answer, especially when he was drinking or using banned substance. He was first imprisoned in $2,000. After his release, he moved to Louisville to be with a woman he had met. Relatives of Dale criminal provided police with photographs of him and helped them identify his girlfriend Jennifer Smith. This was the same name found in Eddie's notebook. Investigators located Jennifer's address and immediately arrived, but found only her mother. The mother stated she hadn't seen her daughter in a long time. She'd seen news reports about Jennifer's boyfriend being in trouble and knew the police would be looking for Jennifer. At the time, Jennifer was 23 years old and in college. She and Dale did not have a fixed residence but frequently moved between rented apartments and motels. Jennifer's mother confirmed that Jennifer was dating Dale. She'd observed their strong attachment. After Eddie's massacre, both had disappeared. Mother was sure they weren't in the city. She was deeply worried about Jennifer's fate and promised to report any information she received, begging the police not to harm her daughter, believing she might also be a victim of a dangerous criminal. Despite the search, no trace of Dale and Jennifer. Sometime after the visit to Jennifer's house, the police station received another call. Jennifer had returned home and wanted to speak to the detectives. Within minutes, investigators were at her doorstep. From the beginning of the meeting, it was obvious that something was troubling her. After a little pressure, she began to tell the truth. Jennifer claimed that Dale was responsible for Eddie's death, but he wasn't the only victim. She knew that Dale had also killed another man named Blaine and provided his address. While Jennifer was being transported to the station to continue the interrogation, a police squad was sent to Blaine's apartment. Law enforcement officers gained access through the building's owner. Inside the bedroom, they found the body of a 70-year-old man on the bed. He had multiple stab wounds, primarily to the chest and torso. The murder weapon was an ordinary kitchen knife, just as in Eddie's case, demonstrating the criminal's similar bloody methods. Unlike the previous crime scene, there was no arson. However, the apartment was ransacked, and valuables were clearly stolen. The murder weapon was found on the bed near the body. The knife was sent for forensic analysis, and experts were able to find fingerprints on the handle. These fingerprints matched Dale in the database, leaving no doubt that the criminal was continuing his activity. Meanwhile, at the station, Jennifer was being interrogated. According to her confession, she hadn't realized how dangerous Dale was when they first met. She met him through mutual friends at a party and was immediately attracted to him. By the time of his arrest, they had only known each other for 2 weeks. He seemed charismatic and attractive, and he knew how to behave in society. Initially, his image was very positive. During the week they dated, Jennifer was happy, even though the couple was essentially homeless, moving from place to place. Her mother had kicked them out because she disapproved of their lifestyle, as they spent all their free time in bars. During another party at a bar, they met Eddie and his friend Blaine. Both men were very friendly, and, after hearing the couple's story, Eddie offered to let them stay at his place. He was proud of himself for overcoming his addiction to alcohol, which he attributed to the help he received from Alcoholics Anonymous. Eddie felt a need to help others. He understood Jennifer and Dale's housing difficulties. Unfortunately, his kindness would end with a knife in his face. According to Jennifer, they lived with Eddie for several days. On the night of the murder, Dale was clearly being abuse-aggressive in the bedroom. Eddie caught them and was angered by their brazenness. An argument began, and Jennifer immediately left the room. At some point, Dale ran out. Slamming the door, he rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and returned to Eddie. A few minutes later, he came out covered in blood and told Jennifer that they needed to leave immediately. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Jennifer was in shock, and he apparently stained her clothes with the victim's blood at that moment. After a brief thought, Dale committed arson in the bedroom. Dale and Jennifer grabbed their things and ran away. About 45 minutes passed from the moment of the murder to their escape. Later, they got rid of those bloody clothes. Jennifer claimed she didn't participate in the crime and couldn't have stopped Dale with words. She was even afraid to enter the bedroom after the murder. She was so scared that she didn't even think to call an ambulance, especially given her shock and the uncertainty of how Dale would react. Jennifer was forced to obey Dale and help him cover his tracks. Now, Dale and Jennifer needed a place to spend the night. They went to Blaine's apartment, as Dale had his address and had offered help if needed. Of course, they didn't tell Blaine about the murder. They changed clothes, took showers, and tried to appear presentable. Jennifer claimed she was so exhausted that she fell asleep on the couch around 4:30 a.m. When she woke up, she saw Dale, her boyfriend, emerge from Blaine's bedroom, covered in blood again. She was afraid to ask Dale about what had happened. He ordered her to gather everything of value, after which they fled. Detectives found it strange that Jennifer was so insistent on justifying herself from both murders. Her attempts seemed clumsy and overly obvious. She tried to point out that all this happened without her participation against this background. It seemed strange why she did not try to escape from Dale and go to the police. Given all of this, it seemed odd that she hadn't tried to escape Dale and go to the police immediately after the first murder, but instead continued to obediently follow him. When questioned about this, she cited fear and shock, but her explanations sounded unconvincing. Investigators believed she was lying and must have been involved in the crimes. Jennifer had more than enough opportunities to escape Dale and call for help. Notably, they were captured on some city surveillance footage, where they both appeared completely calm, like a couple in love. Evidence clearly did not show that Dale was forcing Jennifer to follow him. She appeared to do everything voluntarily. According to Dale, after escaping from Blaine's house, they stayed in Indiana at the home of a friend of his. Jennifer intended to flee, but he ordered her to return her home. Dale promised to contact her later. After Jennifer's confession, she was charged with 2 murders: robbery, arson, and tampering with evidence. Now, investigators are focused on finding Dale. The only thing Jennifer knew was that he had always dreamed of going to Miami, so he was most likely heading toward Florida. Louisville law enforcement contacted the Miami Police Department, reporting that a dangerous criminal was moving in their direction and that an arrest warrant had already been issued. Most of all, police were afraid that he would kill someone else. The dangerous criminal remained at large for more than 2 weeks. He was never found. A tip from Jennifer suggested he might have been lying on purpose to mislead the police. The killer, who had brutally dealt with 2 men, could have been anywhere. He was, of course, considered especially dangerous because he was ready to do anything to remain free. Finally, on the 16th of April, Miami law enforcement contacted detectives and reported that Dale had been arrested. He was apprehended in a stolen car. It was established that on the 30th of March, he had stopped at a bar in Daytona Beach, where he talked at length with a 75-year-old man. Dale was likely preying on elderly, gullible people, using his charm. This time, he persuaded the stranger to rent a hotel room. Once inside, he took out a knife and, out of old habit, pointed it at the man. However, this time he did not kill the man, as the victim offered no resistance and immediately surrendered his wallet and car keys. Dale left. Hotel staff witnessed him leaving the building and then attempting to open several different cars until he found the correct vehicle. As soon as the criminal left, the hotel staff helped the victim and called the police. Miami police immediately recognized the suspect. They had been tracking him for a long time. Based on a tip from colleagues in Louisville, he was located on the city's surveillance cameras and detained. Following his arrest, the killer was sent to Louisville. Dale willingly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He admitted that when Eddie tried to evict him from his house, un argument ensuite, at some point, he lost control, grabbed a knife, and killed Eddie. He then realized he needed to cover his tracks. Together with Jennifer, he took the most valuable items from the house and then committed arson. Afterward, they went to Blaine's house, who quickly began to suspect that something was wrong. Therefore, Dale decided to kill Blaine to prevent him from turning them in to the authorities and eliminating any traces. He used the same method, taking a knife and stabbing Blaine. After that, he and Jennifer robbed the victim again, and the couple fled. Dale immediately took the blame and admitted that he was fully responsible for both massacres. According to him, Jennifer was merely an accomplice and did not participate in the killings. However, Jennifer followed the killer of her own free will. Dale Moneypenny was immediately charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder and arson. He faced the death penalty. In order to avoid it, he made a deal with the prosecution. As a result, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On September 30, 2008, Jennifer Smith pleaded guilty to complicity in double murder and arson, for which she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She served 5 years and was released on parole in 2011 at the age of 29. On the morning of November 6, 2012, people on their way to work found the body of a young woman on 18th Avenue in Quezon City. She was wearing a white top and blue leggings. She had no shoes or purse or identification with her. Her eyes were open in a fearful expression. Then, police officers arrived and secured the scene, and a medical examiner was called. It was clear that she had been murdered. She had been shot 5 times in the head and had bruises, scrapes, dark marks on her body. indicating severe trauma. Injuries to her pelvic area suggested she may have been abused. She had no personal belongings except for a McDonald's paper bag in her hand. Detectives also found a McDonald's receipt nearby. While law enforcement tried to identify the victim, neighbors began giving their accounts. Some reported hearing gunshots around 5 a.m. Others saw a dark SUV speeding away. One witness said someone in the SUV shot at a person already on the ground. 2 other witnesses recalled part of the SUV's license plate number, which became a key detail early in the investigation. Crime scene technicians delayed moving the body to protect evidence. Within hours, the area was crowded with police, onlookers, journalists, and people recording videos. On the 5th of November, Julie Ann Rodales, a 20-year-old model, left her family's home in Las Piñas. It wasn't immediately cause for concern because Julie often worked late or spent time with friends. That evening, she told her mother and younger brothers not to wait up for her. Julie was going to meet a close friend, Althea Altamirano, to try and repair their relationship after a recent argument. Althea had invited Julie to meet a potential modeling client, which Julie saw as a good opportunity. Julie dressed carefully in a white top and blue leggings, and put on makeup. Around 6 p.m., she left to meet Althea at the SM Mall of Asia in Pasay. It started as a normal evening. 2 friends watched a movie, chatted, and strolled around. Later, they took a taxi to the World Trade Center, where they were to meet a client there. Around 10:30 p.m., as they walked on Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard, a dark SUV stopped next to them. 2 men jumped out, seized Julie, and shoved her into the SUV very quickly. Althea, who was right beside Julie, was unable to stop them. Julie's purse and shoes were left on the sidewalk as the SUV sped away. Althea was panicked and stayed where she was, clutching Julie's things and sobbing. Police officers saw her distress and stopped to help. They took her to the police station. There, she gave a confused account, saying that Julie had been kidnapped by strangers she didn't recognize. She said the attack was sudden. She barely saw the vehicle, only that it was a big, black SUV. She emphasized that they hadn't tried to take her too. At around 12:40 a.m., after giving her statement, Althea texted her boyfriend asking him to come pick her up. He arrived with his father, and they took her home to Cavite. By the following day, she had stopped answering calls from law enforcement. Later, her relatives claimed that she was afraid for her safety. However, detectives noted several inconsistencies in Althea's story. She failed to mention the prearranged meeting with Julie or the purported professional introduction they were to have. Julie Ann Rodales was born on July 14, 1992, and raised in Las Piñas, a southern suburb of Metro Manila. Within a modest but close-knit household, she was one of 6 siblings. Her mother, Luz, supported the family by preparing and selling homemade meals. A father figure was absent from their lives. His whereabouts and identity remained unknown, and he played no role in their daily existence. Despite the financial hardships, Julie grew up surrounded by love and support. From a young age, she was focused and responsible. Her decision to study hotel and restaurant management at Arellano University, a private college, was deliberate and driven by her long-term goals. However, the high tuition costs forced her to put her education on hold several times. To help fund her studies, Julie began working part-time. Modeling wasn't a pursuit of fame for her. It was a practical solution to cover her expenses. Her entry into the industry came through a personal connection, which eventually led to commercial shoots and an appearance on the ABS-CBN network. Julie's modeling career began to gain traction. She was featured in photo shoots for well-known men's magazines, including FHM Philippines. Her appearance, work ethic, and professionalism helped her secure steady gigs. She carved a path forward in a highly competitive field, while balancing her studies and modeling career. A significant influence in Julie's modeling career was Althea Altamirano, a friend, 3 years her senior, Althea had also entered the modeling world and, by 2012, had gained a modest level of recognition. She was featured as a Girlfriend of the Month in the September issue of FHM that year. In her social circles, Althea was viewed as ambitious, energetic, and goal-oriented. However, behind the image of success were personal details she kept carefully hidden. She was a mother of two. She chose not to publicize this, knowing it could undermine her image as a young and unattached professional model. They had known each other for years, and their relationship appeared close from the outside. Julie trusted Hare deeply. However, things shifted as Julie began gaining more traction in the industry. As her popularity grew, so did the tension between them. In Althea's eyes, Julie had gone from a friend to a rival. At the same time, rumors began spreading among other models that Althea was raising two children. Althea suspected that Julie was the one who had shared that information, and she saw it as a betrayal. That moment marked a turning point in their relationship. What started as quiet jealousy gradually turned into resentment and, eventually, into conflict. Though the tension remained unspoken, it hung heavily between them. Althea's growing fear of losing her standing in the industry pushed her toward confiding in her boyfriend. Fernando Quiambao Jr. was 32 years old and owned a tattoo shop in Quezon City. He was known for his aggressive behavior. According to Althea, during one of their arguments, he once pointed a weapon at her. Although she felt threatened, she didn't leave the relationship. It was Fernando who came up with the idea to scare Julie, suggesting it would help her understand who she was dealing with. The plan was to stage a confrontation without letting things go too far. Althea didn't push back on the suggestion. She didn't have a concrete plan, nor did she seem to grasp how serious the situation could become. Althea chose the moment, shared Julie's location, led her to the designated spot, and stood by silently when the incident occurred. None of these actions were impulsive. Right after Julie was kidnapped, she was taken to a house on Leno Street in Salam Compound, Quezon City. Compound is a crowded residential area with mostly Muslim families. The house was being used as a temporary hiding place. Inside, several men associated with Fernando were openly present. The kidnapping was planned in advance, and each person had a specific job, according to court records. The first person to isolate Julie was a man named Efren Talib. He took her into a separate room. Soon after, others in the house heard her yelling and pleading for help. One of the men present, Waraji, later testified that he heard her cries, but chose not to intervene. That's when the aggression escalated physically. Witnesses stated that Efren was the initial aggressor and remained alone with her for an extended period. Evidence later confirmed that she was subjected to both physical assault and an act of aggressive harassment. Later that night, a man named Aldos, described by others as dangerous and unpredictable, arrived at the house. He was not part of the original plan, and his presence was unwanted. Jamer, Aldos, and others were already there. Aldos, armed with a .45 caliber handgun, quickly took control. He ignored objections and announced he would assault Julie before she was taken care of. No one present intervened. Aldos's arrival dramatically escalated the situation. Unlike the others, he didn't treat it as a scare tactic or staged intimidation. His actions made it clear that he never intended to let Julie leave the house alive. Aldos told Julie she was going home as she exited the house. Julie, relieved and optimistic, thanked him, not knowing he was lying. Meanwhile, the others were planning how to get rid of her body. Yamar, realizing the situation was worse than he expected, left. He later became a crucial witness in the investigation. While the remaining people proceeded with their plan, Fernando went to a McDonald's on United Nations Avenue in Manila at 2:03 a.m. He ordered 2 cheeseburger combo meals to take away. He returned to the house and gave one meal to Julie. Fernando learns that Aldos and Efren attacked Julie. She was in shock, almost unresponsive, and couldn't speak clearly. Fernando assessed the situation and then stated that Julie needs to be dealt with. The tension inside the house intensified when one of the men accidentally said Fernando's real name while inside the vehicle. Julie may have heard it. Fernando feared that if she survived and recognized him by voice, she could become a serious problem. Investigators later confirmed that Aldos fired the first shot at Julie, followed by Efren. The firearm had been brought in advance, part of a plan that had clearly gone much further than intended. While Julie was still being held captive in the house on Leno Street in Quezon City, in the early morning hours, around 5 o'clock a.m., Julie's body was placed into a Mitsubishi Montero and driven away from Leno Street. The vehicle made a brief stop at 121 18th Avenue in Quezon City. There, the door opened, and her body was pulled out and left in a roadside ditch. Julie's family was worried when she didn't come home. Julie had never disappeared before and always kept in touch. This time, she hadn't contacted anyone. Her family tried to reach Althea, but she didn't answer. They started searching for her. The next morning, a news report about a young woman's body found in a ditch led Julie's mother, Luz, and her brother to the morgue. The clothes on the body matched what Julie had been wearing. Luz confirmed that the victim was Julie. This was devastating for the family. At this point, the police began investigating the connections between Julie, Althea, and Fernando. The day after Julie's body was found, investigators from the Criminal Investigation and Detection Unit started examining crucial evidence. They began by analyzing a McDonald's receipt clutched in the victim's hand. Using the time printed on the receipt, the police asked for security camera footage from the McDonald's on United Nations Avenue. The video showed a clear image of a man of medium height with noticeable tattoos ordering takeout at around 2 o'clock a.m. His face was easily recognizable. Concurrently, authorities were verifying details about a vehicle seen fleeing the scene. Witnesses had reported a black SUV, believed to be a Mitsubishi Montero. 2 individuals even partially recalled the license plate number. From this information, investigators traced the vehicle to a woman named Rosalina. A background check revealed that her son, Fernando Quiambao Jr., regularly used the vehicle, placing him at the center of the investigation. He matched the McDonald's customer's photo at 2 o'clock a.m. On the 9th of November, police began watching the Quiambao family's house. They didn't see Fernando the next day, but around 6 o'clock p.m., they saw his father, Fernando Quiambao Sr., leave. He was driving a black Toyota Innova and heading northwest. Officers followed him without being noticed. About an hour later, Fernando Sr. stopped in Apalit, a small town in Pampanga province. He went inside a Bahay Kubo, a traditional Filipino house. Fernando's mother's Mitsubishi Montero was parked close by. Police then entered the property and found Fernando and Althea inside. They didn't resist arrest, and no weapons were found. A forensic team investigated the scene, and the suspects were taken to the station for questioning. Around midnight on the 11th of November, police entered the house that had been used to hold Julie. There were armed people inside, and a gunfight broke out. One suspect, Fahad Osman, also known as Bob, was killed. Then, Jamar Waraji and Jilan Pasawa were arrested, charged with illegally having guns, and brought in for more questioning. At first, all suspects denied being involved in the crime. But as the questioning continued and the pressure mounted, their stories started to change. Jamar admitted he was at the house where Julie was held and began to help the investigators. He said he agreed to help Fernando because he was loyal to him, explaining that Fernando often gave him and others alcohol and money. Jamar identified Efren Talib and Aldos as others involved. Jamar stated that Aldos acted on his own and made the situation worse than anyone anticipated. Althea, interviewed separately, gave her version of the events. She admitted to agreeing to lure Julie to the location, but claimed she had no idea that things would go as far as they did. She stated that she believed it was only meant to scare her. Fernando, for his part, remained silent during questioning and demanded that his arrest be ruled invalid. insisting there was no evidence directly linking him to the crime. The investigation eventually confirmed that 7 individuals were involved: Fernando Quiambao Jr., Althea Altamirano, Jaymar Waraji, Jilan Pasawa, Efren Talib, Aldos, Bob, who was fatally shot. It became clear that the events were not the result of a personal dispute or emotional outburst, but were part of a coordinated and premeditated plan that ended in a tragic loss of life. As details emerged, the case gained wide media attention, and the investigation moved into high gear. After Althea was arrested, she agreed to talk to detectives. However, she immediately became defensive. During questioning, she claimed her boyfriend, Fernando, had manipulated and pressured her. She said Fernando had threatened her in the past, so she felt forced to follow his plan. Althea claimed she went into shock after the abduction and didn't know what to do. This, she said, was why she initially lied to the police and hid what really happened. She insisted she didn't know where Julie was taken or what happened to her. Jaymar Waraji's account differed significantly from Althea. He gave investigators a detailed description of the plan's creation, identifying each person's role and explaining how the operation unfolded. Jaymar stated that Althea informed Fernando of Julie's location and created the cover story used to entice Julie to the meeting. He also claimed Althea knew the SUV, and the people in it were waiting. Investigators believed Althea's actions demonstrated her willing participation in the abduction. After the arrest of several suspects, Aldos and Efren disappeared. Police couldn't catch them, so they were declared fugitives, and a national alert was issued. Jaymar helped the police create images of them to show the public. However, Aldos and Efren remained free, avoiding capture not just in 2012, but for many years after. The case took a surprising turn when one of the detainees, Jilan Pasawa, was released on bail in January 2013. He had been charged with illegally possessing firearms, but investigators lacked solid proof connecting him to the deadly attack or any acts of violence. Shortly after his release, on June 15th, a violent event occurred at his Quezon City home. While his family was eating, an unidentified person entered the property and fatally shot him. Jilan's wife refused to cooperate with the investigation and signed a waiver preventing any further inquiry into the incident. Consequently, the perpetrator was never caught. Jilan's death was a setback for investigators because he could have been a witness in Julie's case. Although he claimed he wasn't involved in Julie's death, his part in planning her abduction remained unclear. Despite this, the case was officially closed because Julie's family declined to press charges. The public strongly criticized this decision, even though the attacker was known. The police couldn't act without the family's complaint due to existing laws. By the summer of 2013, almost everyone connected to the case was either arrested or had an arrest warrant out for them. Althea insisted she wasn't to blame for anything and denied knowing Aldos or Efren. However, witnesses, the order of events, and confirmed details all proved she was lying. By the end of the investigation, the authorities knew exactly who had made the important choices, who had participated in the crime, and who was still on the run. Nearly 12 years passed from the time of Julianne Rodelas's tragic death to the first sentencing in the case. For a long time, the investigation remained stalled. It wasn't until 2024 that a trial was finally scheduled for Fernando Quiambao Jr. and Althea Altamirano. The initial court date, set for the 12th of July, was rescheduled 3 times. Although the reasons for the delays weren't officially disclosed, the victim's family believed the repeated postponements only served the interests of the accused. The trial began in September and lasted several months. Court sessions examined witness statements, case files, surveillance footage, and text communications between the involved parties. Notably, the firearm used in the fatal incident was never recovered. 2 of the suspected perpetrators, Efren Talib and Aldos, remained fugitives. After the trial, the court found Fernando Quiambao Jr. guilty of kidnapping, being an accessory to a violent crime, and engaging in aggressive behavior. Fernando received a life sentence with a minimum of 22 to 40 years. He must also pay the victim's family 500,000 Philippine pesos as compensation. Althea Altamirano was found guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The court determined that there wasn't enough evidence to prove she knew beforehand that the kidnapping would involve fatal harm or aggression. Prosecutors couldn't directly prove she was at the crime scene after the kidnapping or that she had contact with Aldo's or Efren. Therefore, she was only convicted of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Althea had already been detained for more than 12 years. The court decided that this time served satisfied her sentence and ordered her immediate release. She was also fined 100,000 pesos. This decision provoked a strong emotional reaction from the Rodelas family. Luz, Julie's mother, along with several of her siblings, attended the sentencing hearing. Alvin, one of the brothers, publicly stated that forgiveness was impossible. The family appealed to the Supreme Court, requesting a re-evaluation of Althea's actions. In their view, her role in the events was not secondary, but pivotal. She initiated the conflict, involved Fernando, and had a personal motive driving him. Aside from the legal aspects, the case brought up difficult ethical issues. The prosecution proposed two possibilities: professional jealousy and personal resentment, fueled by a desire for revenge. The first idea was that in the cutthroat world of modeling, leaking personal information could seriously harm someone's career, where image is everything. The second idea was that Julie's greater success, landing more important jobs and becoming more popular, upset their relationship. Althea lost control and began to see Julie as a competitor instead of a friend. This change and the resulting loss of status may have been very humiliating for Althea. The key unresolved issue is whether Althea should have anticipated the outcome. Legally, the answer was no, but the facts suggest otherwise. Althea was aware of the nature of the people involved and Fernando's history of aggression. She initiated the chain of events and then relinquished control to individuals known to use violence. The court's failure to acknowledge Althea's role in these events left the Rodelas family feeling that justice had not been served. Two key individuals involved in carrying out the crime remain at large. The Rodelas family continues to push for a full review of the case. Julie's mother declared that she would keep fighting for justice and called Althea's release an insult to her daughter's memory. On a quiet morning in Aguascalientes, the shops were open. The streets were starting to get crowded. On a street corner, next to an old trash can, a small box was discovered quietly left behind. Inside, a horrifying secret was hidden: the body of a child. This story would open one of Mexico's most shocking cases, where the truth was hidden for more than 2 decades, and justice was just barely coming before it was too late. It was a peaceful November morning in Aguascalientes. The city was slowly coming to life. Shops were opening, and people were beginning their routines. However, on a quiet street, next to an old dumpster, something unusual lay waiting. Dylan Randall Mercado Gonzalez was born in Zacatecas, Mexico, on July 20, 1995. His mother, Liliana Lucero Mercado Gonzalez, was from Puebla, Andrés Amador Gerido. Her partner at the time was Dylan's father, but he refused to acknowledge Dylan as his son. Liliana and Andrés separated, leaving Liliana to raise Dylan by herself. Later, Francisco Javier López González, also from Puebla, became involved with Liliana. This relationship would significantly change Dylan's life. Francisco had a dark past. His first son, from a previous marriage, died under suspicious circumstances. He supposedly fell down the stairs while in his care. That tragedy destroyed his marriage, but not his freedom. Eventually, Francisco and Liliana married and moved into a new home in Zacatecas. With little Dylan, Francisco made a living photographing weddings and other social events, while Liliana trained as a dietitian, baked cakes, taught low-calorie cooking classes, and handmade hair accessories. They also devoted to Gnosticism an esoteric doctrine that claimed spiritual salvation could be achieved through knowledge. Francisco saw himself as a philosopher and spiritual guide, an image that masked the darkness within their home. By the end of 1999, they had a daughter, and then Liliana was pregnant with twins. Although they seemed happy to the outside world, Dylan's life was difficult. Starting at age 4, he suffered constant physical and emotional abuse. People remembered him being forced to bathe in freezing water outdoors. Even in winter, he also had to kneel on stones for long periods or carry heavy things until he was exhausted. Neighbors often heard him crying at night. They noticed that Dylan was treated like an outsider in his own family. Liliana and Francisco clearly favored their daughter and were excited about the twins' birth, but they seemed to see Dylan as a problem. Francisco was described as a jealous and controlling man. He restricted Liliana and their daughter's activities, but would leave Dylan outside alone for hours. Dylan's only advocate was his maternal grandmother, who attempted to gain custody to safeguard him. However, before she could, the family abruptly disappeared, moving to Jalisco and concealing their secrets. Unfortunately, this relocation did not improve Dylan's situation. Reports surfaced indicating the abuse persisted and intensified. Tragically, the escalating violence culminated in a fatal incident that horrified Mexico and ignited widespread public condemnation. On the night of the 11th of November, 1992, Liliana and Francisco argued for reasons that were never fully clarified. At some point, Francisco turned his anger toward Dylan, attacking him with such force that the boy did not survive. He died without ever receiving medical help. Determined to hide the crime, Liliana and Francisco wrapped Dylan's body and placed it inside an empty egg carton box, securing it tightly with cords. The following morning, the 12th of November, Francisco went to the bus terminal and took a bus to Aguascalientes, roughly 60 miles away. When he arrived, it took a taxi to the La Estación neighborhood. The taxi driver remembered Francisco being quiet and refusing help with a box he was carrying. In La Estación, Francisco looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he put the box in a trash container, hoping the garbage collection would get rid of any evidence. However, things didn't go as expected. Before the garbage truck came, a recycler looking for valuable materials in the trash saw the box tied with string. Thinking it might be worth something, he took it out and cut the strings open with a small knife. Inside, hidden under plastic bags and fabric scraps, he found the body of a young child. He was shocked and yelled for help, breaking the silence and attracting people who became the first witnesses to a crime that would soon be famous. The early morning quiet was broken by the recycler's screams. People who were out early and shopkeepers just opening up were drawn to the noise. They went to see what was happening, filled with curiosity and shock. Soon after, the police arrived. The area was quickly cordoned off, with officers keeping back the growing crowd of onlookers. The boy's body was encased in layers, a white tablecloth decorated with Christmas motifs, a floral blanket in brown and yellow tones, and multiple black plastic garbage bags. Forensic specialists documented the scene, photographing every detail and dusting for fingerprints before preparing to remove the remains. Some accounts later suggested that a sharp object with reddish stains was found near the body. Whether it was connected to the crime or simply the knife the recycler had used to cut the bindings on the box could not be determined. The child was curled into a fetal position, wearing only a t-shirt with a purple collar and a print from the animated film, 101 Dalmatians. Visible injuries hinted at the brutality he had endured. The autopsy would reveal far more. Multiple abrasions and bruises of varying ages. Cigarette. Burns. A small wound approximately 5 mm on the upper right lip, likely caused by a blow. Swelling on the right frontal area of the skull. And catastrophic internal trauma. The cause of death was determined to be severe cranioencephalic trauma, combined with a cervical spinal cord injury and a powerful abdominal blow that ruptured the bladder. Forensic estimates placed the boy's age between 3 and 5 years. He was described as having light brown skin with a slender build, brown hair, and coffee-colored eyes. His forehead was broad, eyebrows moderately thick, nose straight, and lips of medium size. He had been dead for at least 16 hours before discovery. The area had no clues, like papers or toys. To help figure out who the child was, or who his parents were, the media publicized the case, and the community was deeply moved. Public grief intensified when officials announced that the boy would be buried anonymously in a mass grave if his name remained unknown. A woman, Margarita Alonso Castillo, then approached the state attorney with a unique request. She wanted to symbolically adopt the boy to ensure he received a proper burial instead of being buried as an unidentified person. Investigators were initially suspicious of her, thinking she might be involved in the crime. However, after questioning her, they determined she was just a compassionate citizen with no connection to the events. Once her motives were confirmed, the attorney's office and the civil registry approved her request. The boy was renamed Leonardo Misael Barranco Alonso. This allowed them to issue an official death certificate and provide him with a proper burial, instead of leaving him in an unmarked mass grave. The investigation continued, but progress was slow. To identify the child, authorities created a composite sketch and released a post-mortem photograph to the media, hoping someone would recognize him. Soon, 2 witness statements offered a potential breakthrough. A man reported seeing someone carrying an egg carton-like box walk from a taxi to the dumpster where the child was found. The taxi driver confirmed he drove a passenger from the bus station to that location. He said the box seemed heavy, and the passenger acted secretive, refusing help carrying it. Both witnesses described the man as being between 30 and 35 years old. Police created 2 versions of a composite sketch of the suspect, one with a hood and one without, and distributed them widely to generate leads. For nearly 2 years, the case remained unsolved. Then, in 2001, an unexpected turn came when the story was featured on the television program Mujer, Casos de la Vida Real, hosted by actress and presenter Silvia Pinal. The broadcast brought the haunting image of the unnamed boy and the mystery of his death back into the national spotlight. The episode, titled "The Boy in the Dumpster," aired for roughly 30 minutes. It was dramatized by well-known actors recreating the events leading to the discovery of the unidentified child. During the broadcast, host Silvia Pinal made a public appeal, urging viewers to share any information that could help reveal the boy's identity or lead to those responsible for his death. The effect was immediate. The already disturbing case was now known to millions of homes throughout Mexico, causing a strong and emotional public response. A national awareness campaign was launched. The resulting tips and testimonies helped investigators get closer to solving the case. Dionisio Perez Tamotzli was one of the first people to come forward. He asked to examine the composite sketch and photo of the child carefully, believing he might know him. When shown the images, his expression changed, and he identified the child as Dylan Randall Mercado. Dionisio explained that he used to be business partners with Francisco, Dylan's stepfather. They had met through their shared interest in Gnosticism, and Dionisio's last sighting of Francisco and Liliana was in Jalisco. He also revealed that he had once witnessed Dylan being mistreated, a memory that he deeply regretted, especially because he didn't intervene. The investigation uncovered more connections. Francisco often traveled between Jalisco and Aguascalientes to develop photos. Investigators also pointed out that the dumpster where Dylan's body was discovered was near the Asociación de Artesanos' meeting place, suggesting Francisco was connected to the area. The search led to Araceli González Becerra, Dylan's grandmother, who identified Dylan's remains and belongings, especially the floral blanket he was wrapped in, which the family had owned for over 20 years. DNA tests confirmed Araceli was Dylan's grandmother. With Dylan's identity now established and suspicion firmly on Francisco and Liliana, the story returned to national headlines. The heightened interest prompted Silvia Pinal's program to produce a second installment of the episode, this time presenting updated details from the investigation. Despite the renewed attention, both Liliana and Francisco managed to remain fugitives for years. In 2003, a new clue surfaced. A man resembling Francisco visited a family services office in Jalisco, Mexico, to ask about adopting a child. He said his son had recently died. However, authorities believed he might have been trying to have another child to pretend was Dylan if anyone asked about the boy's disappearance. Shortly after this, Liliana and Francisco disappeared again. Investigators then theorized that they might have entered the United States. This possibility led the FBI to begin its own search and add the couple to its most wanted list. In Mexico, the pursuit was hampered by a trail of false leads. The suspects moved constantly, rarely staying long in one place. Reports surfaced that Francisco would take out loans in the cities where they stayed, only to disappear without repaying them. Since 2002, Liliana and Francisco had been living in Chetumal, the capital of Quintana Roo, under false identities, without the authorities knowing. They remained undetected there for over 20 years. They started a new life with their daughter and the twins, who were born shortly before Dylan's death. Francisco continued his work as a photographer, while Liliana, now called Fabiola, sold flowers in Chetumal. Neighbors remembered seeing her walking around town with the younger children, known locally as the Little Twins. Some recalled that she often pretended to be pregnant, supposedly to gain sympathy and increase her flower sales. In Chetumal, most residents simply saw them as an ordinary family, unaware of their past. The mystery surrounding their location ended when a crucial piece of evidence came to light, changing the direction of the investigation. Official reports indicate that Liliana started therapy after claiming to be a victim of domestic violence. During therapy, she mentioned incomplete details about her past, specifically a crime that occurred in Jalisco in November 1999. While her statements were unclear, someone close to her used this information to investigate further. This person linked Liliana's fragmented memories to the unsolved case of a boy found in a dumpster in Aguascalientes and then reported it to the authorities in Aguascalientes. With this lead, a coordinated operation was launched between the authorities of Aguascalientes and Quintana Roo. On the night of Saturday, the 4th of January, 2025, agents from both states moved in. Liliana, now 49 years old, and Francisco, 55, were arrested and named as the primary suspects in the murder of Dylan Randall Mercado. Days later, it was confirmed that Liliana and Francisco would be extradited to Aguascalientes on Thursday, the 9th of January, 2025. After reviewing the collected evidence, a judge ordered their formal imprisonment, ruling that there was sufficient proof to hold them responsible. Liliana and Francisco were charged with aggravated intentional homicide, classified under the state's penal code as a killing committed with advantage and brutal ferocity. If found guilty, they could face sentences of up to 40 years in prison. Liliana's family believes she was also a victim, subjected to long-term abuse and manipulation by Francisco. They suggest that years of physical and emotional control may have forced her to protect him, or even participate in the crime against her will. They claim Francisco physically killed Dylan, while dominating Liliana. However, Liliana's silence for many years, her choice to live under an assumed name, and her continued relationship with Francisco, while in hiding, cast doubt on these claims. Public opinion remains divided. Was she an unwilling accomplice? Or did she act knowingly alongside her partner? Adding to the complexity, legal analysts have pointed out that the arrest took place barely a year before the statute of limitations for aggravated intentional homicide under the 1999 Penal Code would have expired in 2026. This timing meant the window for justice was almost closed. In the end, Liliana and Francisco's capture, though delayed by decades, was seen as a symbolic victory in the fight against impunity. For many, it was also a measure of justice for a boy whose short life had been defined by neglect, violence, and betrayal. Margarita passed away on the 8th of January, 2018. She and Dylan share the same grave. Dylan's story is not just about a terrible crime. It's about right and wrong. Liliana's involvement is especially disturbing. Some argue she was manipulated and abused, while others say she failed to act and was complicit. Before Liliana met Francisco, he had already lost a child in a questionable way. Despite this, she chose to be with him, let him care for her son, and, according to several accounts, even joined in mistreating the boy. Even if she was forced to, she still abandoned her child. If Liliana feared for her safety or her children's, she had years to get help. Instead, she stayed silent, rebuilt her life with the man accused of murdering her son, and hid the truth. Staying with him, knowing what he had done, was more than just weakness. It was, at the very least, a failure to protect her child as a mother should. The killing of Dylan was not solely the act of one violent man. It was also the result of a mother's moral and emotional abandonment. Justice may have finally caught up with them, but the case forces an uncomfortable reflection. The most vulnerable often remain invisible victims when those entrusted with their protection choose fear, convenience, or complacency over action. On June 19, 2021, in Italy's Brescia province, the highly anticipated summer car race, Mille Miglia, began. Cars started their journey on June 17, crossing half the country to reach Rome. As the participants made their way through Salò, tens of thousands of tourists lined the coast, enjoying the picturesque views of Lake Garda. With boats anchored along the shore, the race was set to continue the next day. And in the evening, people relaxed and celebrated, enjoying the city's nightlife. As dawn broke, the festive atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Journalists had gathered to cover the race when they noticed a boat drifting near Partes on Lake Garda. Upon closer inspection, they realized the vessel was severely damaged, as if it had hit rocks. Yet it remained afloat. When the boat was washed ashore, a dead man was found inside, curled in a fetal position and wearing a blue shirt, with dried blood everywhere. The scene resembled a horror movie. Along with his belongings, a woman's handbag was discovered on the boat, raising suspicions that he might not have been alone. Around the same time, a man named Enzo Garzarella visited the police station in Salò to report his son, Umberto Garzarella, missing. Umberto had left home the night before to watch the race and take a boat ride with his girlfriend. Although Umberto often went on such trips, they were usually brief, and he avoided sailing at night because of safety concerns. When Enzo noticed his son was missing for an unusually long time, he attempted to call him multiple times, growing increasingly worried when his son didn't answer. The Carabinieri were already aware of the found body in a wrecked boat on Lake Garda and brought Enzo to the scene for identification. Upon seeing his son Umberto's feet protruding from under a white sheet on the beach, Enzo immediately recognized him and fell to his knees, crying. Umberto, 37 at the time of his death, was well known in Salò as the owner of a company established by his father in 1996, specializing in servicing water heating boilers. He was a kind, tall and energetic man who loved sailing. Tragically, this was not the only distressing news that morning. Just a few kilometers away, another family was anxiously awaiting the return of their daughter, Greta Nedrotti, a 25-year-old economics student. She had also failed to come home after an evening walk on June 19, 2021. The last contact her parents had with her was that night, and from then on, her phone went unanswered. They tried not to worry, believing that she was celebrating the races and enjoying time with her boyfriend. Her family became even more alarmed when they woke up early in the morning and still saw no sign of Greta. However, their concern grew when they woke up early in the morning and still had not seen any sign of her. The situation grew more urgent when the Carabinieri from Salò contacted Greta's family, informing her father that they had found a bag containing her ID card. They did not mention that it had been discovered on a severely damaged boat. While it was already known that Greta had been on the broken boat, her exact fate remained unclear, leading to a decision not to cause further alarm for her parents. Nonetheless, this lack of transparency did little to alleviate their concerns, and the entire family was in a state of panic, actively searching for Greta. Initially, the investigation suggested that some sort of collision had occurred, resulting in Greta ending up in the water. After checking all local medical facilities and confirming that Greta had not been admitted, authorities speculated that she might still be in the lake or that she had already drowned. A search and rescue operation was launched on the water, and diving teams spent about 12 hours searching the lake. Eventually, Greta's body was discovered at the bottom. The condition of her body indicated a severe accident, as her legs were partially amputated, and she had numerous cuts and other injuries throughout. Upon hearing this devastating news, Greta's parents were heartbroken. They had held on to hope, refusing to believe that Greta would never come home. Just the day before, she had been trying on beautiful dresses in her room for an evening event. She had recently started dating a popular boy named Umberto Garzarella. Greta was a vibrant and friendly young woman, dedicated not just to her family but also to her education and career. In a statement to journalists, her father recalled seeing her last as she sat on the living room couch, reading before hurriedly packing to leave. She had informed them she would return late that evening, but she never did. The loss of their only daughter was a profound shock for the family. When the news of Umberto and Greta's tragic deaths on the lake broke, local newspapers and news channels flooded the area. Continuous live broadcasts from the scene attracted interviews with locals who knew Umberto and were eager to share what a wonderful person he was. Greta's parents also spoke, highlighting their daughter's aspirations for a master's degree while working at an accounting firm. Those who knew her described her as intelligent and goal-oriented. Even Greta's ex-husband, with whom she had remained on friendly terms, spoke to the media. This revealed that Greta and Umberto were well-liked individuals, yet it did not clarify the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Questions arose about what had occurred on the lake, and even law enforcement was puzzled. Initial theories suggested that Umberto might have consumed too much alcohol or fallen asleep at the helm, leading to the collision. However, Umberto was an experienced sailor and handled boats well, making this scenario seem unlikely. A blood alcohol test showed he had only consumed about 1 glass of wine that evening, which would not significantly impair his judgment. Additionally, the damage to the boat above the waterline was unusual, with the side of the vessel appearing sliced significantly along the hull. The police contacted the lake's Coast Guard, and experts concluded that the boat had likely collided with another vessel traveling at high speed. The force of impact kept Umberto's boat from sinking, and pieces of a different colored hull were found in the breach. These fragments likely belonged to another vessel involved in the incident. During witness interviews from the night of the 19th of June, police spoke with a man who provided the first clue that could help solve the case. He reported hearing a loud bang late at night and then saw a large object moving away from the lake's shore. Due to the darkness and distance, he did not realize a collision had occurred. But after the crash, one of the boats appeared to drift away. Noticing a long, jagged hole on the starboard side of a boat, police decided to follow up on a report made to the lake's Coast Guard the previous day. However, there had been no calls about collisions or accidents on the water. That same morning, the Coast Guard discovered a damaged motorboat, the Riva Super Aquarima, which had an estimated value of around 800,000 euros. At that moment, no one linked this boat to the deaths of Umberto and Greta. The Riva was moored at a small factory in Salo. Far from the race location, it was heavily damaged, particularly at the front, and wooden chips of a different color were found in its hull, likely from the second boat involved in the accident. A check confirmed that these parts matched components missing from Umberto's boat. The next step was to determine the owner of the damaged vessel. It turned out that the owner was Christian Theismann, a 50-year-old German tourist, who was vacationing at Lake Garda with his friend, 52 years old, Patrick Casson, also from Germany. Both men were high-ranking executives at major international companies who had come to Salau to enjoy the lake, watch the race, and relax. They were easily located at a hotel near the pier where the wrecked boat was found. They appeared confused when they were taken in for questioning. They seemed unaware of the situation and were clearly intoxicated, smelling strongly of alcohol. Language barriers complicated communication since they did not speak Italian, and the Carabinieri did not speak German. Despite the difficulties, detectives have managed to piece together the events that occurred that evening. Patrick and Christian recounted that they spent most of the day on their boat. They walked along the lake shore, observing the race, and stopped at various docks in Brescia to buy drinks and snacks. Later in the evening, they dined at a restaurant before boarding their boat again at 11 p.m. They believed that around 24 minutes later, they collided with Umberto's boat. However, their memories of the incident were vague, claiming they crashed into a large log without hearing any screams or seeing anyone, and then quickly returned to the pier at the hotel. Law enforcement agencies discovered surveillance cameras in the area and reviewed the footage, which captured the moments after a collision. Patrick and Christian did not stop to help Umberto and Greta. Instead, they sped towards the coast and docked near their hotel at 11:31 p.m. When Christian and Patrick got off their boat, CCTV footage showed them struggling to maintain their balance, clearly indicating they were very drunk. Patrick stumbled and fell onto the dock. The video clip of Patrick and Christian, who are suspected of wrongdoing, quickly went viral after it was leaked to the media. The release of the recording led to a public outcry within days. Local residents were furious with the behavior of the German tourists. Patrick and Christian, especially after learning that Christian had initially refused to take an alcohol test. Many believed he should have been tested since it was evident from the footage that he was barely able to stand. Eventually, Christian was convinced to take the test, which revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.29 part per million, even 14 hours after his detention. This indicated that he had been extremely impaired at the time of the accident and likely unable to comprehend the situation. It is worth noting that, when speaking with the Carabinieri, Patrick and Christian were irritable, insisting they had done nothing wrong and that they were being held unlawfully. They believed they had hit a log, which is why they didn't stop and return to shore before their boat sank. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage did not capture the speed of the men's boat. This sparked further discussions. While there were disagreements about the exact speed, many believed the boat was traveling faster than 30 kilometers per hour. This was supported not only by the damage to Umberto's boat but also by Greta's injuries. Coast Guard experts stated that Christian's boat was moving at a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour, significantly exceeding the allowed speed limit in the dark. Still unclear about the situation, Patrick and Christian hired lawyers. It is worth noting that, until that moment, they had not fully understood that their actions had resulted in the deaths of Umberto and Greta, largely due to a language barrier. Once they understood the seriousness of the incident, they became noticeably calmer. Preliminary hearings took place, after which Patrick and Christian were sent back to their home city of München. They were instructed to stay there until the trial commenced. This decision shocked the families of Umberto and Greta, as the two murderers were allowed to return home after signing written agreements not to leave. They carried on with their normal lives, seemingly unaffected. While waiting for the judge to set a trial date, from the outset, both Patrick and Christian had been listed as suspects for manslaughter and for failing to assist victims Umberto and Greta. This charge carried a relatively light sentence, with potential penalties of less than 10 years for the two lives they took. The trial was expected to be challenging, primarily because it was difficult to determine which man was operating the boat during the collision. Both Patrick and Christian claimed to have no recollection of the event. Detectives aimed to clarify this and other elements of the incident by gathering more evidence prior to the trial. Relying heavily on camera footage, the public reacted negatively to the decision to permit Patrick and Christian to return home, viewing it as an attempt to evade punishment and responsibility. Umberto's family and Greta's family felt that this leniency was facilitated by Patrick and Christian's wealth and connections. and they believe the suspects prioritized their freedom and reputations over the victims' lives. Moreover, the families were understandably worried that the suspects could escape justice. 2 weeks after the tragedy, Christian and Patrick sent letters of apology to Greta's parents and Umberto's parents. However, the families rejected these letters, which were printed rather than handwritten and bore no signatures. They viewed this gesture as insincere. This response was particularly upsetting given the horrific circumstances surrounding Umberto and Greta's deaths. Umberto died instantly from the force of the impact, while Greta suffered severe injuries, including multiple fractures from being struck. Initially, it was believed that Greta had drowned after being thrown from the boat due to the collision. However, the actual circumstances were even more tragic. The families mourned the loss of their children, burying them in their hometowns just days apart. In remembrance, they released hundreds of white balloons into the sky. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation, searching for information to determine who was driving the boat at the time of the accident. They gathered CCTV footage and interviewed witnesses. Eventually, they managed to obtain footage from a villa overlooking the lake in Port Sea that captured the collision. While the recording was grainy, it revealed important details. Clearly, the boat involved belonged to Patrick and Christian, and it collided with Umberto and Greta's boat. This footage clarified the circumstances of Greta's death, showing that she had not been thrown from the boat. She remained inside during the impact. After the collision, Patrick and Christian's boat was seen moving away from the damaged vessel. Moments later, something small fell into the water, resembling Greta's dress, and bloodstains were found on the boat's hull, initially thought to belong to Umberto. It seems that Greta was in a state of panic. She crawled over the side of the boat and jumped into the water, trying to swim to shore to save herself. However, due to the extent of her injuries, her legs were cut up. She struggled to swim and ultimately drowned. By September 2021, the prosecutor's office determined that Patrick was the one driving the boat, which belonged to his friend Christian. This meant Christian also held some responsibility for letting an untrained and intoxicated person operate his property. On July 5, Patrick went to the city prosecutor's office to surrender voluntarily. He wanted to avoid arousing too much attention and being taken into custody from his home in handcuffs. As he was concerned about the potential impact on his family, he confirmed that he was driving the boat, which resulted in a list of charges against him: 2 counts of manslaughter, failing to assist in a rescue, and operating a vessel while drunk, all of which contributed to the lake accident. Investigators had thoroughly reconstructed the events of that evening, revealing a picture of reckless behavior and excessive alcohol use. After the collision involving Umberto and Greta, the boat was tied to the shore, and Patrick and Christian did not return to their hotel. Instead, they went to another bar. They sustained only minor injuries, and when they were picked up the next morning, no serious injuries were reported. They failed to contact emergency services, even anonymously. Witnesses noted that 2 very intoxicated men who spoke German entered the bar. Struggling to form coherent sentences, one man hit his head on a wooden pillar and felt nauseous but refused assistance. By the end of September, the court announced that hearings would begin in November, during which time Patrick was held in custody. Meanwhile, the families of Umberto and Greta had received financial compensation from the insurance companies of Patrick and Christian. Prior to that, they sought justice for their loved ones, attending the hearings in support of their children. When Patrick finally took the stand, he personally apologized to the families of Umberto and Greta for the first time since the incident, asserting that they were unaware of the accident due to their drunkenness. However, this explanation sounded insincere. As of December 19, the hearings were still ongoing. For Umberto's parents, this date was particularly difficult because it marked what would have been their son's 38th birthday. Umberto's father approached Christian, urging him to take action to honor both Umberto and Greta. The next day, Christian unexpectedly visited Umberto's gravesite, where he apologized once again, and shared his plans for a charity project aimed at supporting families affected by accidents. Patrick remained involved in the hearings, with his lawyer working to reduce his culpability. Initially, the lawyer disputed Patrick's level of intoxication, arguing that it was unprovable how much he had drunk before getting on the boat. An independent expert was hired to challenge the Coast Guard's conclusion that the boat was traveling over 40 kilometers per hour, claiming instead that it was going no faster than 10 kilometers per hour. Then events took a bizarre turn. The defense attempted to shift blame onto Umberto for not taking the necessary actions to avoid the boat. The lawyer accused Umberto of being negligent and violating maritime regulations. He also suggested that Greta may have failed to comply with safety regulations, as she was allegedly standing in the position where the collision occurred. Upon hearing this absurd defense, Umberto's father left the courtroom in frustration. Christian's lawyer even claimed that Christian was asleep while the boat was moving, implying he could not control Patrick's actions. In March 2022, a lengthy trial was concluding. Prosecutors sought a 5-year prison sentence for Patrick Casson and 5 years for his friend Christian Theismann. However, the court only accepted part of these claims. Patrick, who had been driving the boat, was sentenced to 5 years, and Christian received a sentence of 2 years and 6 months. The court's decision focused solely on the manslaughter charge and did not consider their failure to assist the victims, Umberto and Greta. This shows that their irresponsibility was overlooked, as their testimony that they thought they had hit a large log was accepted without any doubt. By May, the appellate court upheld the sentences, which then took effect. Families of Umberto and Greta, along with concerned citizens, expressed their outrage at the court's leniency, especially regarding who was actually steering the boat. Surveillance footage revealed that when the two men departed from shore, it was Christian, the boat owner, who was in control, not Patrick. Friends of Patrick and Christian stated that the owner, Christian, rarely allowed anyone else to steer the boat. This raised important questions about who was at the helm and whether Patrick and Christian had switched places. Umberto and Greta's families attempted to challenge this point but were unsuccessful. The only course of action left for them was to advocate for a change in the law to ensure stricter penalties for such incidents. Consequently, a petition was launched to equate water-related accidents with those occurring on roads. On September 20, 2023, the Chamber of Deputies approved the bill after gathering 100,000 signatures. It passed with 288 votes in favor and only 1 against. This amendment to the Criminal Code is informally named after Umberto and Greta. Thanks to this initiative, penalties for causing death in a water accident can now range from 2 to 18 years in prison, while penalties for causing bodily harm can go up to 7 years. Born on August 1, 1982, in Elmira, New York, she was the youngest of Elizabeth Stage and Howard Stage's 3 children. Her father, Howard, was well regarded in the community, having been the chief of the West Elmira Volunteer Fire Department for many years. Kelly's older sister, Kim Bourgeois, who was 10 years older, it was very protective of her. Kim felt like a second mother to Kelly, describing her as very brave, sassy. Kelly enjoyed dancing and was very beautiful. She had the potential to be a model. That was her aspiration. Kelly had a vibrant personality and big ambitions. This led her to leave her teaching job and move from her hometown to Las Vegas. There, she became a cocktail waitress. She loved her new life, enjoying the glamour and wearing extravagant costumes. Kim recalled how much Kelly enjoyed the fast-paced and exciting atmosphere of Las Vegas, even wearing a 30-pound feather headdress to work. Then, Kelly returned to Elmira because she was drawn to Thomas Clayton, a well-known hockey player for the Elmira Jackals. Clayton had a reputation both for his performance in the semi-professional league and his behavior outside of it. Kim later said that people admired him because he was attractive, a troublemaker, which many found captivating. Thomas was from Binghamton, New York, and studied at Niagara University, where he played ice hockey. He then joined the Elmira Jackals and played forward for 4 seasons, from 1998 to 2002. During this time, he became a popular figure in the small town due to his charm and athletic ability. However, his reputation was also affected by his reckless behavior and numerous relationships with different women. Kelly and Thomas were instantly attracted to each other when they met at a hockey game while she was visiting home for Christmas. Even though Thomas was known for being reckless and having a bad reputation, Kelly was captivated by his charm and popularity. Their connection was so strong that Kelly quickly decided to give up her thrilling life in Las Vegas and move to New York to begin a new chapter with Thomas. They married within a year of meeting. Kelly changed her last name to Clayton, her husband's last name. They settled in Cayton, New York, to start their life together. Everyone thought they were deeply in love and had found something special. After an injury ended Thomas's hockey-playing days, he shifted his career focus and became the owner of a water and fire damage restoration franchise called Paul Davis Emergency Services of the Southern Tier. He later became a project manager at Serve Pro, a similar franchise owned by his close friend Brian Lang. Thomas seemed dedicated to building a successful business and providing for his growing family. Kelly Clayton embraced her new role as a wife and mother while also working as a waitress at the Woodhouse Stadium Grill in Corning. Their first child, Charlie Emma, was born in 2008, followed by their son, Cullen, a few years later. To outsiders, the Clayton family appeared perfect. Kelly balanced, caring for their 2 children with her job, and Thomas ran his business successfully. They were busy, but seemed like a happy family of 4. However, their marriage was starting to show signs of trouble. Thomas had become a gambler and openly carried a lot of cash. The couple kept cash in 2 safes at home, and Thomas frequently took large sums to casinos for high-stakes poker. His gambling was becoming a serious problem. Once, he even lent his car to a friend's sister, while unaware that $22,000 was in the trunk. As Thomas and Kelly's marriage went on, Thomas's unhappiness and restlessness became obvious to their friends and family. Kelly was dedicated to their family and marriage, but Thomas seemed emotionally detached. He started having affairs. During these affairs, Thomas often complained to the other women about Kelly, calling her lazy and saying he wanted to leave her. However, he always told them he couldn't divorce her because she would take everything. This suggests that Thomas wanted to end the marriage but didn't want to pay for a divorce. About a year before Kelly's death, a major warning sign appeared. Thomas doubled her life insurance policy from $500,000 to $1 million. This large increase, along with his affairs and complaints, suggested he was planning something terrible. Thomas mistreated his employees. He would often keep them in debt to him, using tactics such as giving them loans, extra work. Michael Beard was one such employee. Thomas seemed to use this debt to control his employees, making them dependent on him. Michael had worked for Thomas at Thomas's businesses and at Serve Pro, a company owned by Thomas's friend, Brian Lang. Because of this, Michael knew the Clayton family's home well, including its layout. He had worked there many times and had been trusted to enter their private areas. However, Michael was fired from Serve Pro just 12 days before Kelly Clayton's murder. He was fired because of complaints about drinking, banned substance use, and stealing from clients' homes. This left him in financial difficulty. He couldn't pay rent to Thomas for his apartment, and he didn't have a car or a driver's license, making his situation even worse. After firing Michael, Thomas seems to help him by suggesting job opportunities and buying him a bicycle. During the next 12 days, they spoke on the phone often, a detail that became important later in the trial, thanks to cell phone records. Although it looked like Thomas was simply helping a former employee who was struggling, the prosecution argued that he was actually exploiting Michael's financial hardship to pressure him into committing murder. On September 28, 2015, Thomas and Luke Tetrol, an employee, switched trucks that day to make unloading easier. However, a security camera footage from a storage unit near the company revealed the truck swap was carefully planned. That Monday evening, Thomas drove to Greg Miller's house in Corning for their regular poker night. Arriving around 8:00 p.m., he used a company truck instead of his own car. Greg and his wife, Linda, hosted the weekly game where friends and neighbors played low-stakes poker until late. On the 28th of September, 2015, Thomas seemed fine during the game. But before 11:00 p.m., he asked Linda Miller to use her phone. This simple request would later prove to be important evidence. Around 10:50 p.m., Thomas called Michael from Linda's phone. This call initiated the murder plot. At the time, Michael was at home, arguing with his partner. After the call, around 11:30 p.m., Michael left home on his bicycle. He rode to Serve Pro, where he retrieved the maroon truck Thomas had left for him. Next, Michael picked up Mark Blanford. Blanford later stated he didn't know about the murder plot and thought he was just watching out for a break-in. The maroon truck arrived back at the company parking lot at 12:55 a.m. On September 29, 2015. Surveillance footage showed someone leaving the parking lot on a bicycle a few minutes later, presumably Michael returning home. Back at the Clayton home, Kelly was with her 2 young children. She had no idea about the terrible events that were about to happen. Around midnight, Michael used a key Thomas had given him to enter the house through the garage. He was wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask. Charlie later said the mask looked like one her father wore when hunting. Kelly was asleep in her bedroom when Michael broke into her house and went upstairs. He attacked her in the master bedroom, hitting her twice with the handle of a fiberglass maul. The attack woke Kelly, but she fought back and tried to escape. She ran from the bedroom towards her daughter's room down the hall. While trying to get away, Kelly fell down the stairs, hitting the wall at the bottom. She then ran through the dining room into the kitchen, but Michael caught her and continued hitting her with the maul handle. He brutally beat her head and face until she died from her injuries. On September 29, 2015, sometime after 12:30 m-, Thomas came home from a poker game and found his wife, Kelly, dead in the kitchen. He said she was lying in a pool of blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle that started in the bedroom, continued down the hallway and stairs, and ended in the kitchen, where Kelly died. Thomas called 911, appearing shocked and upset while reporting his wife's death. However, investigators quickly became suspicious. They felt his behavior and description of the scene seemed insincere. Police officers arriving at the scene found a very bloody crime scene. According to Deputy Dean Swan, Deputy Swan's body camera recorded the shocking aftermath, which he described as almost unbelievable. Evidence showed that Kelly had been beaten to death with great force, resulting in severe head and facial injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing from the house. This eliminated robbery as a motive, suggesting the attack was personal and intended only to kill Kelly. Within hours of the murder, Kelly's family members arrived at the scene. Her sister, Kim Bourgeois, and her mother, Elizabeth, were at the house within an hour of the police's arrival. Kim later described the horror of that moment. Her mother and her were wailing. She was throwing up on the side of the road. She can't even explain to you that feeling. The most devastating part of this crime was that Kelly's 7-year-old daughter, Charlie, saw much of it. When police questioned her, Charlie, being so young, first said the person who broke in was a robber. However, her detailed story was very important in solving the case. Charlie told investigators that a man came in and hit her mommy with something like a pipe. She thought her mommy was dead when she saw her on the ground. Charlie also remembered that during the attack, her mother told her to run away, showing that Kelly was trying to protect her daughter even as she was dying. Sheriff Jim Allard felt a chill when Charlie, asked how she knew the intruder was male, replied, "Because his eyes looked just like Daddy's." This statement made Thomas a suspect in his wife's murder, despite his apparent alibi. In a later interview at the Chemung County Child Advocacy Center, Charlie gave more details about the intruder. She described him as wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask similar to one her father wore hunting. When asked to clarify how the intruder resembled her father, Charlie specified his mask and jeans, confirming she had seen her father wear similar items. As investigators began to piece together what had happened, they immediately focused on Thomas as a potential suspect. While his alibi appeared solid, he had been at the poker game with multiple witnesses who could corroborate his presence. Something about the situation didn't add up. The investigation changed significantly when Linda Miller, Greg's wife who was at the poker game, informed the police that Thomas had asked to use her cell phone about 90 minutes before Kelly's body was found. This detail became important when investigators learned that Thomas had called Michael Beard using Linda's phone. Phone records showed that Thomas and Michael had been in frequent contact in the days before the murder. This was strange because Michael no longer worked for Thomas. This increased communication, along with Michael's recent firing and money problems, pointed to a possible murder-for-hire scheme. When police questioned Michael Beard, he initially confessed to killing Kelly Clayton. He stated that Thomas hired him to murder Kelly and burn down the house to collect insurance money. Michael described the murder plot discussions. Starting in April 2015, Thomas allegedly offered him $10,000 for a job that could lead to jail time. Without specifying what it was, Michael joked about killing Thomas's wife for that amount, and Thomas smiled but didn't elaborate. The plan allegedly became firm after Michael was fired from ServPro on September 17, 2015. Michael said Thomas picked him up that day and asked how he would earn income and pay rent. Michael, who lived in Thomas's apartment, claimed Thomas offered him 5 months of free rent, plus the $10,000 to kill Kelly. However, in a stunning turn of events, Michael later recanted his confession before the trial. He changed his story completely, claiming that Thomas had only hired him to burn down the house for insurance money, and that when he arrived at the Clayton home, he found Kelly already dead. According to this new version of events, Michael panicked upon seeing the body and fled without setting the fire, which explained why the house was never burned. After confessing initially, Michael showed the police where he had discarded important evidence after the murder. This included the murder weapon, hidden in a wooded area, blood-stained clothes he wore during the attack, and keys to the Clayton home that Thomas had given him to enter the house. The bloody clothes were found in a swamp about 40 feet from an inn in Elmira. Thomas had previously asked about surveillance cameras at that same inn. DNA tests confirmed that the blood on the clothing was Michael's, providing undeniable proof that he was involved in the murder. Even though Michael later denied his involvement, investigators had strong physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Crucially, Michael's DNA was found on the fiberglass handle of the maul, which was the murder weapon used to kill Kelly. Meanwhile, the case against Thomas Clayton was built largely on circumstantial evidence, but it was overwhelming in its scope and detail. Surveillance footage from the storage facility next to ServPro showed the carefully orchestrated vehicle exchange that allowed Michael to use Thomas's truck to travel to and from the murder scene. GPS data from the company trucks provided a detailed timeline of movements on the night of the murder. The data showed Thomas driving a green ServPro truck that left the company at 6:10 p.m. and arrived at the Clayton home at 7:25 p.m. The truck left the Clayton home at 7:37 p.m. and arrived in Corning 14 minutes later for the poker game. More crucially, the GPS data picked up again on the 29th of September, 2015, when Thomas turned on the truck at 12:22 a.m. and showed the vehicle arriving back at the Clayton home at 12:35 a.m. The time when he allegedly discovered Kelly's body and called 911. The investigation showed that Thomas wanted Kelly dead for two main reasons: money and personal desires. He had secretly doubled her life insurance. Also, he was having affairs and wanted to end his marriage without losing money in a divorce. During the trial, 3 women testified that they had relationships with Thomas while he was married. One of these women was only 15 years old when the affair occurred. The prosecution argued that Thomas wanted to be free from his marriage and collect Kelly's life insurance. Therefore, he found it easier to hire someone to kill her than to get a divorce. His relationships with other women proved he was unhappy in his marriage, but didn't want to deal with the financial consequences of a divorce. Michael Beard and Thomas Clayton were tried separately for first-degree murder. Michael's trial occurred first. In late 2016, although he retracted his confession, the jury convicted him based on the strong physical evidence. Michael Beard was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder in November 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison in February 2017. Beard is serving his sentence at Auburn State Prison. Clayton's trial began in early 2017 and lasted several weeks. In February 2017, after 6 weeks of proceedings and 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Thomas Clayton guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced in April 2017 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, Clayton insisted on his innocence, stating, "He had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kelly." Clayton is incarcerated at Sing Sing State Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. Mark Blanford, 53, pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. Blanford began serving his sentence in April 2017 and was released on parole in late August 2020 from the Cayuga Correctional Facility in Moravia. According to the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, the most tragic aspect of this case was its impact on Kelly's children. In a heartbreaking letter read at Thomas's sentencing, Charlie wrote, "I love my mom. I love my dad. But my dad is a coward because he made Michael Beard kill my mommy." Custody of the children was given to Kelly's sister, Kim Bourgeois, who has worked tirelessly to provide them with a loving home. The murder of Kelly Stage Clayton has left a deep wound in the quiet community of Caton, New York, which prides itself on its reputation as a small town. The death of Kelly, a devoted mother and vibrant woman, is not only a devastating blow to her family, but also a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. Thomas Clayton, driven by financial intrigue and personal grievance, hired Michael Beard to carry out the brutal crime, taking the life of the wife he had promised to love and protect. Charlie's innocent yet haunting testimony became the key to bringing the truth to light, proving that justice can be served even in the most heartbreaking circumstances. Although Thomas and Michael were sentenced to life in prison, nothing could ease the pain of Charlie and Cullen, who had lost their beloved mother. Thanks to the loving care of Kim Bourgeois, Kelly's children are now in a new home. But this story reminds us of the value of honesty, family unity, and the importance of facing conflict with honesty rather than violence. One morning in June in Occitania, France, Amandine Estrabaud, a high school assistant from the small town of Roquecourbe, left for work. That evening, neighbors didn't see her near her home. The next day, her phone stopped working, and her front door was unlocked. Something is fishy. From a young age, Amandine was involved in community events, including the local festival committee. She had a very close and friendly relationship with her mother. She was also close to her brother, Remy. People in Roquecourbe affectionately called Amandine and Remy the village children. After breaking up with her partner, Amandine moved back to her hometown. She was independent and actively involved in life. Even though she had previously lived with her partner near the Castres train station, Amandine hoped to study speech-language pathology and intended to buy a car. There was no indication that she had disappeared voluntarily or was experiencing a serious emotional breakdown. On Tuesday, June 18, 2013, Amandine went to work at the lycée. It was a typical day. She spent the morning helping staff, and everything seemed fine. Around 1:10 p.m., she finished her work and left. Usually, someone drove her home because she didn't have a car. However, that day, no one could give her a ride. Having no other option, she started walking home alone. The walk was approximately 8 miles long and would take her nearly 3 hours to complete. Around 2:15 p.m., Amandine was reportedly seen in the salvage area near a bus stop just a few miles from her home. This was the last confirmed public sighting of her. What happened afterward is still unclear, but investigators have pieced together a possible sequence of events based on second-hand accounts. Although there was no surveillance footage or other hard evidence, a neighbor named Karine helped piece together a key part of the timeline. Karine lived nearby and had a clear view of Amandine's front door from her home. Around 4 o'clock p.m., she noticed a white Renault traffic van parked outside, a vehicle she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. It didn't belong to any locals and stood out as unfamiliar. Amandine got out of the van first. She appeared calm, was wearing normal clothes, and didn't seem upset. Karine saw her holding a bag on her lap and looking for her keys. Amandine unlocked the door and went inside. Soon after, a man got out of the van. Karine couldn't see his face clearly because she only saw him from behind and he was far away. However, she remembered he was about 170 centimeters tall and had a sturdy build. He was wearing gray work pants with large pockets and orange reflective stripes, like those worn by construction, road, or utility workers. Although Karine couldn't see his face, his behavior didn't seem suspicious. He walked calmly and wasn't aggressive. Karine said there was no argument or tension between him and Amandine. They seemed to interact in a normal. She didn't hear any yelling or signs of a fight. Investigators recorded Karine's statement, and it became important to the case. On June 19th, Amandine's mother, Monique, started to worry. They usually met up and had planned to do so the day before. They were very close and always kept in contact. Monique called several times throughout the day and evening, but Amandine didn't answer. Amandine always returned calls quickly if she missed them, but this time Monique heard nothing. Monique initially wasn't worried, assuming Amandine was occupied. However, when she still hadn't received any contact by the following morning, Monique decided to drive to Amandine's home. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked. This immediately alarmed her. Amandine was always cautious, especially living in a secluded area. Inside, everything looked as if Amandine had just stepped out for a moment. A jacket hung neatly on a chair. Her everyday bag was in its usual place. Her phone was left out and unattended. The home was quiet. Monique called out, but no one responded. There were no signs of urgent errands or a quick departure. A visual inspection of the home's interior revealed no signs of disorder. Everything was in its place, no forced entry, no displaced furniture, no items thrown around. Monique felt strongly that something was wrong. Amandine was usually very organized and predictable. Especially recently, she always kept her phone with her, told someone where she was going, and locked her door. Because Amandine wasn't acting like herself, Monique decided to call the police. She contacted the local police station in Roca Courbe. Officers came to the house and looked around. They saw the same things Monique did. There was no sign of a fight. The door hadn't been forced open, and it didn't look like anyone had broken in. It seemed like Amandine had left on her own without being forced. However, after the officers went outside, they found something disturbing. Behind the house, accessible through a sliding glass door, was a garden. While the yard was overgrown, a specific patch of grass caught their attention. It was a rectangular area, about 5 by 5 feet, where the grass was noticeably flattened. The ground was even, and the plants were pressed down, suggesting something or someone had been there for a long time or had exerted force on the area. This suggests that a struggle may have taken place. Near this location, police found some of Amandine's belongings, including a pair of light shoes, identified by Monique as the ones Amandine wore the previous day, and 2 earrings. The earrings were damaged at the clasps, suggesting they may have been pulled off forcefully, perhaps during a struggle. This was the first physical evidence suggesting that something unusual happened to Amandine. Even though the search that day didn't turn up anything new, the investigators had enough information to consider Amandine's case a suspicious disappearance. They started an official investigation. Interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities, the case quickly moved into its active phase. The first step was to review any available surveillance footage. Though cameras were few and far between in the area, authorities also canvassed potential routes Amandine could have taken on the 18th of June, prioritizing anyone who might have seen her that day. The speedy efforts, no new sightings surfaced beyond what had already been documented. Soon, missing person bulletins were issued. Amandine was described as approximately 165 meters tall with long dark hair. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a brown skirt that fell above the knee, a light tan jacket, and a dark blouse. Flyers were posted around the region at bus stops, on bulletin boards, and in local shops. Notices also ran in regional newspapers and on local radio stations. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. At the same time, many people were searching the area between Cantagolan and Salvage, near Amandine's house. Volunteers and officials looked carefully through forests, fields, and along the Agout River. Even though they searched a large area, they didn't find Amandine or anything that belonged to her. Each passing day made it less likely that Amandine had left on her own. Her bank account remained untouched, and there were no phone calls or messages to suggest a voluntary disappearance. Everything pointed to something far more troubling, most likely a crime. In the initial weeks of the investigation, the primary theory quickly became that she was the victim of a violent crime committed by someone else. The investigation then focused a company in Rokukurb, because they owned a utility van matching the description of one seen near Amandine's residence. Furthermore, the uniforms their employees wore were similar to what the man seen entering Amandine's house was wearing. Garrick Jahano, 25, mason at this company, was originally from the area and knew many people, including Amandine's brother, Ray. Before working at the construction firm, Garrick cut granite. His name came up in the case in April 2014 when his mother, Irma, contacted the authorities. She was worried about her son's behavior. Irma said Garrick kept making strange statements, such as, "I'm not a criminal," and, "If they find blood in the van, it's from fish." He mentioned strange smells he encountered while fishing or mushroom hunting and claimed he could smell death. He had become increasingly paranoid, believing people were watching and hunting him. He once said he saw someone in the woods with a shovel, but didn't report it. It was uncertain if these were intrusive thoughts, delusions, or signs of emotional distress. Following his mother's statement, Garrick was questioned for the first time. He was detained for 48 hours in June 2014, but denied any involvement in Amandine's disappearance. Company records initially supported his alibi, showing he was assigned to a construction site in Castres on the 18th of June. His supervisor and colleagues confirmed his presence. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies. A supervisor admitted that after a concrete delivery to a construction site near Rokurib, a 6-minute drive from Amandine's home, he had approximately 90 minutes unaccounted for. None of Garrick's colleagues could confirm his location during that time. It was possible he used the company van to travel near Amandine's residence. Therefore, his whereabouts during a crucial period remained unknown. The neighbor who last saw Amandine before she disappeared was asked if she recognized Garrick. She couldn't say for sure if he was the man she saw. In Rokurb, she knew many people by sight, including Garrick. She did mention that Garrick's usual work pants looked like the ones the man was wearing that day. However, because she only saw the man from behind and through her window, she couldn't formally identify him. Although there wasn't definitive proof, the growing amount of information pointed to Garrick as the main suspect. Even without direct evidence connecting him to Amandine Estrabad's disappearance, he was the first and only person investigators seriously considered. After questioning him, Garrick was released because there wasn't enough legal justification to hold him. Investigators were also trying to figure out why Garrick was in Amandine's home. Initially, they found no clear link between them. However, some people who knew Garrick said he was interested in Amandine. A friend remembered Garrick calling her attractive and openly showing his feelings. Also, Amandine had a small problem at home, a possible water leak in a room, perhaps while running into him on the street or near her home, and he offered to help, mentioning his construction experience. This could explain why he was in her home without forcing his way in. Her relaxed behavior that day suggests she knew him at least a little. All of these elements led to the first working theory in the case. Garrick might have used the situation as an opportunity to get closer to her. But something went very wrong. The motive, actions, and consequences were still unclear. But a coherent narrative was starting to form in June 2016, 2 months after Garrick was arrested for abduction and unlawful confinement, the investigation changed course significantly. Weeks after his initial arrest, he was also charged with premeditated murder. This new charge was based on testimonies from several inmates who had been in the same cell block as Garrick while he was awaiting trial. These inmates claimed that Garrick had spoken openly about his role in Amandine's disappearance. One inmate stated that Garrick described abuse-aggressive actions followed by Amandine's death. This inmate provided details that had not been released to the public, suggesting Garrick had direct knowledge of the events. Garrick allegedly confessed to disposing of Amandine's body and hiding her belongings. One inmate reported this information to investigators in a recorded interview. These inmate testimonies were considered credible, especially since no other confessions had been made in the case at that point. Then, Garrick provided 2 hand-drawn maps. The first map showed where he claimed to have buried a body and covered it with lime. The second map showed the coordinates where he said Amandine's jewelry was hidden. Both maps had Amandine's name on them. These maps led to a large search operation in the area Garrick indicated. For several weeks, search teams, including archaeologists from Institut National de Recherches Archéologiques Préventives, searched the difficult, wooded terrain near Ambres. The area was mountainous with steep ravines, streams, and thick vegetation. They used ground-penetrating radar and carefully examined caves and natural pits. However, despite the detailed maps and the extensive search, they found neither a body nor Amandine's jewelry. Later, Garrick changed his account. He claimed the drawings had nothing to do with Amandine's disappearance. Instead, he said they showed his favorite spots for fishing and mushroom picking. He suggested he wrote Amandine's name on them either to keep people away from his spots or to gain respect from other inmates. His lawyers argued that he was deliberately trying to seem intimidating to avoid trouble in prison. Although Garrick later contradicted his initial statements, those statements still carried legal significance. Investigators emphasized that Garrick revealed details that only someone directly involved would likely know. This insider knowledge strongly suggested his involvement, even though he hadn't confessed. The case against him relied not on one specific piece of evidence, but on a combination of factors, circumstantial details that aligned his actions, his words, and information that was unlikely to be known by someone not involved. Over 7 years after Amandine Estrabad vanished, the trial of Garrick Jahano began on October 8, 2020. In the Albi Court of Assizes, Garrick Jahano was charged with kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, and murder. The case was unusual because there was no body, confession, DNA, blood, or any other direct physical evidence. Despite the lack of direct proof, the prosecution thought the indirect evidence was compelling enough to justify presenting the case to a jury. Garrick's alibi had contradictions and his past statements had inconsistencies, which were part of the evidence presented in the trial. Digital records also raised suspicion. His gaming console, which he used every day, was not turned on the night in question. He claimed he just didn't play, but he had previously told investigators that he spent the evening playing PlayStation. This contradiction was important to the prosecution. Garrick's behavior in court was met with varying reactions. Journalists observed that he seemed uninterested in the trial, refused to look at pictures of Amandine, and didn't react to her mother's emotional statements. When questioned about his feelings while viewing Amandine's picture, Garrick stated that he felt nothing. This seeming lack of emotion strengthened the impression that he was emotionally distant and detached. Several witnesses characterized him as a withdrawn individual who became aggressive when intoxicated. and these observations were officially documented in the court records. Garrick denied all charges. His lawyers argued that the prosecution lacked direct evidence, and that the case relied on speculation. They claimed the prosecution's case was built on guesses, unreliable inmate statements, and indirect evidence. The prosecution responded that the inconsistencies in Garrick's story, the absence of any other reasonable explanation, and Garrick's actions strongly suggested he was involved in a violent event. On October 14, 2020, Garrick Jahano was found guilty by a jury of abducting Amandine Estrabad, unlawfully detaining her, and causing her death. He received a 30-year prison sentence, which he will serve in a high-security prison. The court stated that the evidence presented, even without Amandine's body being found, was compelling and consistent enough to convict him. This case was highly publicized and is one of the few times in French legal history that someone has been convicted of homicide when the victim's body was never recovered. After being initially found guilty, Garrick appealed the decision. A second trial started on November 15, 2021. At the Toulouse Appellate Court in the Haute-Garonne department, the charges against Garrick remain. The defense argued that he was convicted despite a lack of evidence. One lawyer likened the case to other unsolved disappearances in the area, such as Delphine Jubilars, who disappeared without a trace in December 2020. Like Amandine's case, Jubilars' body was never found. The prosecution, however, restated its arguments. The focus remained on Garrick's questionable alibi, his unaccounted-for movements during the key time window, his inconsistent statements, and his suspicious behavior following Amandine's disappearance. New details also emerged regarding his concerning online activity, highlighting a pattern of obsessive and troubling internet behavior, including viewing content with deviant themes. Prosecutors laid out a likely scenario. Garrick offered Amandine a ride, possibly under the pretext of helping inspect her home after she had mentioned plumbing issues. Once inside, an incident occurred, possibly a confrontation following unwanted advances, which escalated and ended fatally. Defense lawyers denied this version, pointing out that no one saw him leaving the house, and there was no physical evidence of aggression. On the 19th of November, 2021, the appellate court upheld the original verdict. Garrick Jahano was again found guilty. But contrary to the Estrabad family's hopes, the 2021 ruling wasn't the final chapter. In 2022, the Court of Cassation overturned the decision due to a procedural error. One required legal phrase was missing from the court's written justification. Though the omission was technical, it triggered a mandatory retrial. The third trial occurred in January 2024 in Montalban, Tarn-et-Garonne. The prosecution repeated their previous arguments, claiming the amount of circumstantial evidence proved guilt. They again used Garrick's statements from prison, his drawings, and previous inconsistencies in his behavior as evidence. The defense tried to prove Garrick was not at the crime scene and had no connection to the crime was an Eversound. Garrick, who had turned 35 by the time of the hearings, once again denied all charges. In a surprising twist, his mother changed her story, claiming she never said the things attributed to her in the official records. This sudden reversal caused a strong reaction from both the court and the prosecution, as her original statements had played a key role in launching the investigation. Despite efforts by the defense to dismantle the central elements of the case, they were unsuccessful. On the 30th of January, 2024, Garrick Jahano was found guilty for the third time on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and committing a fatal act against Amandine. He was once again sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, the Court of Cassation rejected his final appeal, confirming the verdict as legally binding. The disappearance of Amandine Estrabad led to a highly unusual and controversial trial in France, resulting in 3 guilty verdicts, despite the absence of a body, a confession, and direct physical evidence. This case deeply divided the public. Some believed the verdicts were just and essential, while others felt they were based on too little certainty. Legal experts pointed out that the convictions were based on the bundle of clues principle, a legal concept where a collection of individually weak pieces of evidence can, when combined, create a strong case for guilt. While legal in France, this approach naturally raises the question: at what point does reasonable doubt become too significant to ignore? On October 8, 2003, two fishermen were exploring the coast off Cape May, New Jersey, in their new boat. They hadn't gone far from shore when they noticed something suspicious in the water. Curious, they initially thought it might be a dead animal. As they approached, they realized it was a woman's body. The fishermen immediately contacted law enforcement. The deceased was pulled from the water, and an attempt was made to identify her. Unfortunately, there was no identifying information. She was wearing clothes, but had no identification or distinguishing marks. The victim appeared young, with detectives estimating her to be under 20. Although the time spent in the water made it difficult to be certain, her body was in a deplorable condition. Having been submerged for several days, water accelerates decomposition, and the young woman showed numerous signs of marine life activity. A stone crab was found on her body, consuming the inside of her thigh. According to the forensic expert who performed the autopsy, the body had been adrift for more than a week, possibly even 2. Sea creatures hadn't thoroughly damaged the soft tissues yet. A piece of a large chain was found on her ankles, and her limbs were bound with adhesive tape. There were also signs of a struggle on the body, and investigators suspected she had been abused. However, even a thorough DNA examination proved impossible. As the water had washed away all traces of the perpetrator, the forensic expert believed the body had been submerged for a considerable time. Likely near the seabed, the girl had probably been drowned using some form of weight that eventually broke free. Unfortunately, identification of the victims remains limited. Special features and evidence should be carefully examined before being released to the public. Even at this early stage, investigators anticipated that identification would be difficult. The forensic expert continued to examine the body for any clues that might shed light on the mystery of the girl's death. He wanted to know who she was, how she died. No gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or cuts were found. However, a fracture was discovered at the base of her skull. The specialist concluded that the force of the blow that caused this was equivalent to a fall from a height of 5 stories. Investigators attempted to obtain fingerprints, but her extended submersion in water made this challenging. The skin was severely swollen, requiring further processing of her fingertips to obtain reliable prints. Once obtained, the prints were checked against law enforcement databases and matched to a resident of Dover, Delaware, a small town located near Cape May, approximately 60 kilometers away. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Kimberly Holton. 2 detectives assigned to the case immediately went to the house where the girl lived. Her mother, who was intoxicated, opened the door. The woman was unaware of her daughter's whereabouts, as Kimberly had been living with another couple for several years. Through the mother, investigators learned another address. Kimberly lived in a mobile home located in a trailer park. The girl's adoptive mother opened the door to the detectives. As soon as the woman saw the police, she immediately became alarmed, realizing their arrival was connected to Kimberly. She told the detectives everything she knew about the girl. Kimberly had been born on November 4, 1986, and was just short of her 17th birthday at the time of her death. She had a difficult life from the start. Born into a dysfunctional family, her father had been incarcerated for most of her life and was expected to remain imprisoned for a long time due to numerous criminal offenses. Her mother suffered from addiction to illegal substances and alcohol and had long been indifferent to the girl's fate. Some relatives tried to help her in any way they could but lacked the means to adopt her. Despite these challenges, teachers at school described Kimberly as friendly, intelligent, and calm. She loved animals and aspired to become a veterinarian due to her amiable nature. In 2001, some of her parents' distant relatives, Ron Machette and Lorraine Machette, offered her a home in their trailer park. They had a daughter named Heather Nasakaitis, who had always wanted a sister. Thus, Machette managed to fulfill two dreams at once and helped Kimberly grow up in a more stable environment. Before moving in with Ron and Lorraine, Kimberly had been trying to find a better living situation. Away from her troubled parents, she even lived with her grandfather for a time, 2 years after moving in with her adoptive parents, who hadn't even formalized the adoption. Kimberly had died. According to Lorraine, she had last seen her adopted daughter 10 days before the police arrived at the trailer park, on September 29, 2003. This timeline confirmed the medical examiner's conclusion that the body had been in the water for a week or two. Lorraine also stated that she contacted law enforcement the day after Kimberly went missing. Lorraine explained that she wasn't particularly worried during the first few days of her disappearance, as it was normal for Kimberly, a teenager, to run away from home for a few days. Kimberly had done this many times before, often staying with friends for the weekend, but she would always return. It was thanks to this history that the girl was identified by fingerprints. Kimberly had been on the police database for a long time, simply because she had a tendency to run away from home. When Lorraine had gone to the police station to file a missing person report, the officer took the statement, wrote a report, and interviewed those closest to Kimberly. The policeman was interested in whether she had been seen, but he was unable to find any leads. Given her history of running away, the investigation into this case didn't receive enough attention. But time passed, and there was still no news from her until her body was found. It was immediately obvious that Lorraine was worried about Kimberly. Detectives decided to question Lorraine in more detail to understand Kimberly's relationship with those close to her. Investigators were interested in whether Kimberly could be connected to crime, whether she could have any enemies capable of such cruelty. First of all, they suspected Lorraine herself and her husband Ron, who were in the process of getting a divorce. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Kimberly had reported her adoptive father to the police, saying that he had gotten into bed with her and was molesting her. Lorraine confirmed these fears. According to Lorraine, she had noticed more than once that her husband was looking at Kimberly strangely. The act of molestation confirmed that he had an unhealthy attraction to children. His behavior was the reason for the divorce. After this story, suspicions about Ron only grew stronger. At first, Ron became the main suspect. They investigated him very thoroughly and found out he even had an alibi. Then, his words were confirmed. At the time of Kimberly's murder, he was behind bars. Since immediately after Kimberly's statements, he was arrested and charged with harassment. He spent several days in jail. At least during the time frame of the murder, Ron was cleared immediately. He clearly could not have been involved in the crime. The most significant challenge was the length of time the body had been submerged in the water. This likely washed away any traces of the criminal's DNA. Furthermore, forensic scientists in 2003 lacked access to the sophisticated tools available today. Tools that would allow them to carefully examine and collect minute particles of DNA. They were therefore compelled to focus on other evidence. They focused on the chain on the victim's leg and discovered the manufacturer's identification number. This allowed them to trace it to a chain of building supply stores operating on the East Coast. After checking the records, they found that the chain had been sold at one of those stores shortly before the crime. The investigators then located the manager who had made the sale. However, because the store was a supermarket frequented by hundreds of people daily, the seller couldn't recall every customer. Fortunately, the records allowed them to pinpoint the exact time and date of the purchase. Subsequently, the police were able to cross-reference this information with surveillance camera footage. All the cameras were functional in filming and recording. The chain store management cooperated fully, providing the necessary records. It was then easy to identify the two young men who had purchased the chain. The receipt also revealed that they had bought 2 cinder blocks, further solidifying the police's suspicions. Presumably, these weights had been used, along with the chain, to sink the body and hold it at the bottom. For some unknown reason, the pulleys broke, which aided in Kimberly's discovery before marine life could destroy the body. The police obtained images of the main suspects, but they were disappointed to find that the video, taken from a camera positioned under the ceiling, provided a poor angle. From this vantage point, the faces of the young men were not clearly visible, but it was apparent that they were between 20 and 25 years old. This clue prompted them to show the footage to the public and hold a press conference. A few days later, a man came to the police station, claiming to be one of the individuals recorded by the store camera. His name was Robert Brothers. However, he wasn't there to confess. He wanted to clear his name. He was visibly scared and explained that he had only accompanied his friend, Jacob Jones, who had asked him to help carry some heavy items at the hardware store. He confirmed that Jacob had purchased a chain and 2 cinder blocks, without fully explaining their purpose. When Robert inquired, Jacob was evasive but eventually admitted that the blocks were for some impromptu weightlifting. Robert knew that Jacob was suspected of involvement in the murder of a 16-year-old girl and was deeply concerned. Robert requested that his name be kept confidential and provided a detailed account. He maintained that he had merely assisted in carrying heavy items from the hardware store and loading them into his friend's car, and he had no idea what happened to them afterward. This led detectives to their prime suspect, 20-year-old Jacob Jones. Investigators began to investigate how to connect Jacob to Kimberly's family. It turned out that he was Heather's boyfriend. Heather was about the same age as Kimberly, and they had been living together for the past 2 years. Those close to them described the girls as being very close. They became good friends and even shared clothes to resemble twins. Or so they thought. However, some claimed that the girls didn't get along and often argued. Suspicions and circumstantial evidence mounted. When Robert was approached again and asked why Jacob might have killed Kimberly, he suggested that Heather, who was jealous of Kimberly's beauty, could have been involved. Detectives spoke to Heather. She appeared as concerned about Kimberly's disappearance as her mother. However, like the rest of the family, she initially believed that her adopted sister had simply run away again and would soon return. Her concern only grew when her mother contacted law enforcement and reported Kimberly missing. As days passed without Kimberly's return, the situation became increasingly tense. Heather told detectives that after Kimberly's disappearance, she had sought comfort and support from her boyfriend, Jacob, but he had shown complete indifference. Heather perceived this as uncaring and insensitive, but nothing more. She didn't believe Jacob was capable of murder. Even during her initial interview with the detectives, Heather didn't raise any suspicion. She seemed sincere, cooperative, and provided all the information requested of her, claiming to have had nothing to do with her sister's death. Subsequently, Jacob was brought in for questioning. From the outset, he appeared nervous. He admitted to buying the chains and cinder blocks at the store but claimed that he had used them for other purposes. However, he refused to disclose where they were now. It was evident that he was concealing something. Just moments into the conversation, after they began questioning him more closely about Kimberly, Jacob requested a lawyer and refused to cooperate further. At the same time, Jacob confirmed that he knew about the crime because both Lorraine and Heather had spoken about it. With no specific evidence to present, law enforcement was forced to release him for the time being. Interviews with Jacob's colleagues and friends revealed that he had been acting unusually lately. He had become short-tempered, aggressive, and prone to lateness or even absenteeism, behaviors that were out of character for him. No one in Jacob's social circle could explain this sudden change. Just 2 weeks after Kimberly's body was recovered from the water, Heather and her boyfriend, Jacob, were having lunch at a cafe. Heather directly asked Jacob if he had been involved in her sister's murder. His reaction was peculiar. According to Heather, he responded that his lawyer had forbidden him from discussing it with anyone. Heather was shocked. She had expected a more open response, an angry denial of guilt, or something else that would demonstrate his innocence. At that point, Heather began to suspect that Jacob was acting suspiciously. Despite her growing doubts, she still found it hard to believe that her boyfriend could have committed such a brutal act as killing her sister. Detectives decided to investigate Jacob's background more thoroughly. At the time of the crime, Jacob was 20 years old, and had recently graduated from high school. By most accounts, he seemed like a good person. He had even earned his pilot's license at 16 and always dreamed of flying. He seemed like a promising young man, and his qualifications were unusual for someone so young. He appeared responsible and had no history of violence. However, disturbing information soon surfaced. Several witnesses confirmed that Jacob and Kimberly did not get along. Kimberly often picked on him, even in Heather's presence, constantly calling him Four Eyes because he wore glasses. Some people knew she teased him because he wanted to become a fighter pilot, and she mocked his vision problems, insisting he would never succeed. They had even had arguments about it. The more the detectives investigated the relationship between the two, the clearer it became that Kimberly frequently teased and irritated Jacob. However, this still didn't seem like enough of a reason to kill her. But the coincidences were mounting and becoming too obvious to ignore. Detectives obtained a warrant for Jacob's arrest and immediately went to his house. As the police approached, they noticed suspicious activity. Jacob's parents were outside, his mother was hysterical, and paramedics were inside. Jacob had shot himself in the head with a shotgun minutes before the police arrived, dying instantly. The dead boy's father spoke to the detectives, revealing that Jacob had confessed to killing Kimberly Holton the day before. At the same time, Jacob claimed that another person, 23-year-old Michael Kaiser, whom he had met while working as a security guard at the racetrack, was also involved. Jacob referred to himself as an accomplice, shifting most of the blame onto Michael. Michael and Jacob weren't particularly close, but their paths often crossed at work. Michael was easily located and expressed shock that his friend had taken his own life. However, he denied being the mastermind behind Kimberly's murder, claiming he was only an accomplice. He insisted that Jacob had forced him to commit the brutal act, describing Jacob as a dangerous, cruel, and manipulative person who should be feared. Michael immediately invoked his right to a lawyer and initially refused to cooperate with the investigation. However, with a little pressure, he began to talk. According to Michael, the motive was Kimberly's constant embarrassment, mockery, and humiliation of Jacob, often in front of Heather. Jacob had simply grown tired of it. Michael claimed that Jacob even avoided going to Heather's house if Kimberly was there. However, the detectives suspected that this wasn't the whole truth. It seemed strange that a young man as driven as Jacob, who had earned his pilot's license at 16, excelled in school and at the University of Delaware, and worked as a freelance flight instructor at the Air Force Base, would simply throw his life away. Unfortunately, Jacob, the only one who could provide his side of the story, was dead. Detectives pressed Michael for a more truthful account. According to him, on the night of September 29 to 30, he and Jacob picked up Kimberly from the trailer park, where she lived with her foster family. Jacob instructed Michael to do this because he didn't want to be identified by any witnesses in the area. Michael was then supposed to take Kimberly to a secluded house so Jacob could discuss their differences with her. Initially, Michael believed that Jacob simply wanted to scare her and make her stop bullying. According to Michael's version of events, they then went to a store near a building supply center, where Jacob, Michael, and Kimberly bought alcohol and snacks. Afterward, the three went to a nearby motel. There, the discussion quickly escalated into intimate. Michael claimed that they had intimate with Kimberly, one after the other, with her mutual consent. Afterward, Kimberly went to the shower, and when she came out, Jacob suddenly attacked her, pinning her to the floor and choking her. She lost consciousness after receiving several blows. Michael claimed that Jacob kicked her. Michael said he tried to stop Jacob, but Jacob was stronger and pushed him aside. After Kimberly stopped showing signs of life, Jacob forced Michael to help him secure her ankles with duct tape and wrap her in a blanket. They then attached a chain and cinder blocks to her leg. They loaded the body into the trunk of Jacob's car and drove to the air base on the outskirts of town where Jacob worked. They then loaded the body onto a plane that Jacob used and took off, flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Jacob descended and slowed down. Michael helped throw the body overboard. Detectives believed that this action ruined their plans. As the body was dropped from too high an altitude, the strong impact of the water caused the cinder blocks to break and detach from the chain, and the body sustained a fracture at the base of the skull. The medical examiner determined that the injury was sustained posthumously from a fall from a great height. This version of Michael's confession also seemed unconvincing. It seemed strange that a conversation intended to clarify the relationship would suddenly lead to intimacy. It also seemed implausible that Jacob would spontaneously attack Kimberly when she came out of the shower. After all, there was no obvious reason for it at that moment. The supposed conflict had seemingly been resolved. Therefore, Michael's confession did not inspire confidence in the police. However, the second part of the confession, regarding the disposal of the body, it seemed more credible. It aligned with the fact that Kimberly's body remained undiscovered for a little over a week before being found near the coast. Michael's story about the body being dropped from the air was officially corroborated when the radar data tracking the flight from the airfield was reviewed. It confirmed that they had indeed left the airbase. That night, the plane flew close to the area where the body was later found, made a wide circle, and returned to the base early in the morning. After searching the dorm room where Jacob was staying, the police found a motel receipt dated September 30. The day Kimberly was killed, detectives spoke to Heather again and told her Michael's story. She also believed he was lying and had, in fact, orchestrated the whole thing. She had only ever heard bad things about Michael, describing him as violent and suspicious. Heather was sure that Kimberly hated Jacob, so there was no way she would have had consensual intimate with him or with Michael. Heather was certain that Michael's story was mostly a lie. At the very least, she believed that he had abused Kimberly and was now trying to justify his actions by claiming mutual consent and blaming Jacob, who could no longer refute his accusations. Only 2 days after Michael's arrest, during a routine morning check, a guard discovered that he had attempted to end his own life in his cell, using his shoelaces. Fortunately, he was found in time, with a pulse still beating. Michael was taken to the mid-sanction unit for treatment and then transferred to a ward for rehabilitation and recovery. His actions were regarded as a cowardly attempt to avoid justice, prompting psychiatric evaluations to assess his mental state. Michael was then placed under observation due to the high risk of repeated his own life attempts. In January 2004, the trial began, where Michael was tried for complicity in the murder of Kimberly Holton. The prosecution presented a considerable amount of evidence, though almost all of it was circumstantial. Michael then retracted his confession, and his lawyer attempted to explain it away as a result of insanity. His story about his own life attempt sounded particularly compelling. The prosecutor, however, emphasized that the confession contained many details that had never been published but were verifiably true. He argued that only someone involved in the crime could have known those details. Numerous witnesses testified, corroborating the chronology of events as described by Michael. While awaiting trial and afterward, Michael underwent several evaluations by specialists. Psychiatric experts deemed him extremely immature for his age and easily manipulated, which, they argued, explained his participation in the crime. Experts say that Michael, as a henchman, was simply an accomplice who could not resist Jacob's threats. Crucially, Jacob had a clear motive. Michael was repeatedly offered a plea deal for second-degree murder, which would have resulted in an 18-year prison sentence. However, he consistently refused, convinced that he would be acquitted of murder charges. Throughout this time, he maintained his innocence. Even his lawyer believed he should accept the prosecutor's offer, but Michael adamantly refused. On January 16, the jury began deliberations and ultimately found Michael Kaiser guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was, however, fortunate in a way, as the state increased penalties for such charges a few years later, meaning he could have faced the death penalty. From the beginning of his imprisonment, Michael frequently incurred disciplinary infractions. He was caught with contraband on several occasions and was periodically placed in solitary confinement due to his problematic behavior. Currently, Michael remains in custody at the correctional center. His lawyer has made multiple attempts to challenge the court's decision, but all appeals have been rejected. Heather was never charged with any crimes related to the case. Despite some believing, she also had a motive to eliminate her annoying sister. Heather has since moved to Colorado, started a new life, and graduated from college. She, along with her mother, Lorraine, has spoken to reporters on several occasions. They grieved deeply for 16-year-old Kimberly. They believe that the two young men had brutally harmed Kimberly out of enjoyment or out of resentment, but they continue to blame only Michael for this. Her family tried to assist Kimberly, who was born to addicted parents associated with crime, but they were unable to do so. On a Sunday afternoon in Tijeras, New Mexico, loud explosions shattered the silence. After the noises stopped, they heard a dog yelp, and then silence. It was clear something awful was occurring inside a house. Later, a young man emerged from the house to speak with police, and his statements, along with what the police discovered, shocked the entire community. Join us as we explore this case further, revealing disturbing truth secrets, lies, and a courtroom drama where the distinction between innocence and guilt became more complicated than anyone imagined. The Mestre family wasn't well known in Tijeras, New Mexico, but those who knew them considered them quiet and reserved. The family, consisting of Raimundo Mestre, the father, Bertha Huerta Conde, the mother, their three children, Nancy, Adlai, and Brielle. They had moved to the small community around 2021. They rented a house with a large, private yard, and it quickly became one of their favorite things about the house. Raimundo was a hard-working man devoted to his family. Bertha, his wife, was a kind, caring homemaker, well-liked by their neighbors and friends. By 2024, their oldest daughter, Nancy, had moved in with her partner and was pregnant with her first child. As autumn neared, the entire family eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. However, their joy was short-lived. A sudden and tragic event was about to turn their happiness into grief. On Sunday, the 13th of October, just before 2:00 p.m., emergency services received a call from a concerned man. He explained that he had heard several loud bangs at Mestre house next door. They sounded like gunshots to him, 5 or 6 in all, followed by a single gunshot about 10 minutes later. He also thought he heard the distressed cries of a dog. At first, he thought he might be overreacting, but when he tried to reach their family by phone and got no answer, his anxiety grew. He walked to the house and rang the doorbell several times, but there was still no answer. That's when he decided it was time to call the police. Around 2:14 p.m., officers arrived and their body cameras began recording. As they approached the house, they had no idea what they were about to encounter. They knocked on the door. After a few moments of silence, a disoriented and unsteady young man, 24-year-old Adlai, answered. He chillingly stated his family had attacked him. When asked for more information, he said the attack occurred in his bedroom and a knife was used. The officers told him to come closer. When they asked if he had any weapons, Adlai said yes, and then seemed to reach for something. The officers immediately told him to turn around so they could restrain and search him. Adlai complied. While still in handcuffs, he was asked to recount the events. This time, he stated that his father and sister had attempted to kill him. He claimed his father tried to stab him in the heart with a knife, while his sister held a meat tenderizer. He then confessed, without pausing, that he had killed them both. This was just the start of a story that would become increasingly disturbing and bizarre. Suddenly, Adlai's words quickly became meaningless and incomprehensible. His sentences were disconnected, dreamlike, and made no sense, leaving the officers unsure if he was confessing or simply rambling incoherently. After searching him, officers found a gun in his pants pocket. He gave it to them willingly. They then placed him in the patrol car. The police continued to search the house. At the door, they ordered anyone inside to raise their hands and come out. But no one did. That's when they noticed the first signs of what they were truly dealing with: dark reddish stains on the entryway floor. The patterns were unmistakable. Something violent had happened here. While waiting for backup, the officers began piecing together the grim picture forming before them. Once backup arrived, they entered the house. Inside, they found a disturbing scene. Blood droplets were splattered on the walls, and a trail of blood led upstairs, soaking into the carpet. This suggested that someone had been dragged up the stairs. They also found a severely injured dog, which explains some of the blood. After searching every room, they found no sign of the family. The search then moved to the backyard, where they quickly spotted more drag marks leading away from the house. But the yard was vast, stretching far beyond the officers' immediate line of sight. One officer returned to the patrol car, hoping Adlai could narrow down the search area. When police approached Adlai, the boy immediately begged not to be harmed. The officer calmed him, explaining they only needed to know the location of his family. Instead of answering, Adlai asked if the officer had seen his dog, sounding strangely excited. The officer repeated his question about Adlai's family. Adlai finally confessed that the bodies were in the backyard. He then directed the officer to where the bodies were. The search team received the information and quickly found the bodies of the Pardis, of Clordes, 46-year-old Raimundo, 51-year-old Bertha, and 17-year-old Brielle. Adlai's confession to ending their lives was, at least in this detail, the truth. After confirming the deaths, police took Adlai in for questioning. He claimed the bodies were convulsing and foaming at the mouth, and that their wounds had somehow healed. Then, Adlai launched into another nonsensical story, this time involving seismic waves, the Big Ben clock tower, a submarine, and an unknown woman. The detective let him talk for a few minutes before handing him a pen and a piece of paper and asking him to write down his story. Adlai readily agreed. It was at this point the detective understood this interrogation would be far from typical. After informing Adlai of his rights and making sure he understood them, the detective asked him again about the fate of his family. Ultimately, he confessed to shooting their dog. The animal was rushed for emergency veterinary care, suffering from 3 gunshot wounds. Despite the efforts to save it, the injuries were too severe, and the dog had to be euthanized. Back at the crime scene, investigators recovered a mop soaked with reddish stains. In the interrogation room, the detective continued to press for specifics, asking Adlai where his father had been during the attack and where he had delivered the fatal blows. At first, Adlai's words were nonsensical. Eventually, he stated that his father had been in the living room when he sustained the fatal injuries. Although officers had already located bullet casings inside the house, they also found other evidence: a meat tenderizing hammer stained with blood and a bladed weapon. This combination of clues led them to speculate on the sequence of the killings, but Adlai's statements only deepened the mystery. During the home search, officers found documents from September, just weeks before, showing that Adlai had recently been discharged from a mental health facility. He had been treated there for psychosis. The records mentioned he experienced hallucinations and heard voices. Officers photographed these documents as evidence. Later, when asked what he did with the bodies after killing them, Adlai answered with chilling calm, showing no sign of remorse. He said he had intended to bury them. Among Adlai's incoherent written notes, the detective found disturbing references to possession by dark forces and claims that his family had tried to curse him. It became clear there might be far more to his mental state than he was revealing. Left alone again, his behavior became stranger still. At one point, he appeared to hold a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Then, in an unsettling turn, he urinated into a plastic bottle. When the detective returned and realized Adlai's actions, he reprimanded him, telling him he could ask to go to the bathroom. Once more, the detective stepped out, instructing him to behave himself, but Adlai showed no signs of calming down. Instead, his erratic behavior escalated to a disturbing level. He began shouting to God, then suddenly turned to address the men in the room. Rising to his feet, he moved in a way that, captured on camera, would mark the moment the situation took a sharp, alarming turn. Without warning, Adlai began violently kicking the wall of the interrogation room. Within moments, he had created a hole large enough to squeeze through. Escaping into the hallway, he made a direct path toward the elevators. The noise drew the attention of deputies, who intercepted him just seconds later. It became clear that the walls of the sheriff's office were never designed to hold someone determined to break out. Deciding it was too risky to keep him inside, they placed him in the back of a patrol car to let him calm down. Once he appeared more settled, Adlai was brought back inside for processing photographs, a buckled DNA swab, and the collection of his clothing. He was issued a temporary jumpsuit and escorted back to the patrol vehicle. This time, the destination was the county jail. Upon arrival, he was placed in an intake holding cell. Investigators found Adlai's sister, Nancy, and had the difficult job of informing her that most of her family had been murdered in a shockingly violent way. She became visibly upset, sobbing, and struggled to understand what was happening. In a later interview with detectives, Nancy explained why Adlai might have brought up possession. She was both disbelieving and angry as she described how her family had minimized or excused Adlai's strange behavior. This was partly because their mother believed Adlai was possessed and not accountable for his actions. However, Nancy disagreed with this explanation, believing that there had been significant warning signs that were ignored. Nancy also told detectives that at the time Adlai was released from the hospital, mental health professionals concluded that he was not a danger to himself or others, and that he had never mentioned any intention of harming his family. When asked about his medication, Nancy confirmed he was prescribed treatment, but admitted he was not taking it consistently. She had confronted him about it herself, worried for his well-being. She said she wasn't the only one. Her mother had even found pills in the trash. Everyone in the household had urged him to take his medication. Despite these issues, Nancy said her brother had appeared normal for months leading up to the killings. Authorities later confirmed that the firearm believed to be the murder weapon was legally registered to their mother. On Monday, the 14th of October, the sheriff held a press conference calling the case highly complex and in need of thorough analysis. He disclosed Adlai's medical history and shared key investigative findings. The sheriff also raised concerns about the state's red flag gun laws, measures that allow authorities to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others, suggesting that such intervention might have prevented the tragedy. The neighbor who had first called 911, it spoke to reporters as well, still shaken. He said he had never noticed anything alarming about the family and remembered them only as kind and friendly. On Friday, the 18th of October, 5 days after the murders, Adlai appeared in court for his initial hearing. One of the responding officers testified, describing the scene as brutal. Prosecutors told the judge they had recovered 10 9mm shell casings from the property, and that the victims also showed signs of blunt force trauma. The state played security footage from the sheriff's office, showing Adlai breaking through the wall during his attempted escape. Though calmer that day, the sight of the video prompted him to interrupt his own attorney, insisting he wanted to speak. Ignoring his lawyer's advice, he loudly claimed his medication had been stolen and that he had tried to escape because he was afraid. He repeated strange claims about his parents and sister, saying that they spewed strange liquids from their mouths, and urged the media to release forensic photographs to prove he was telling the truth and that he had acted only to save his own life. End of trial. Adlai Mestre was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of evidence tampering, 1 count of extreme cruelty to animals, 1 count of escape from police custody, and 1 count of criminal damage to public property. His attorney argued for supervised release with proper medication, but the judge sided with prosecutors, ruling that Adlai was a danger to the community and ordering him held without bond. Months later, in April 2025, a judge declared Adlai incompetent to stand trial and ordered him transferred to a mental health facility for treatment. His competency will be evaluated again in the future. For now, no updates have been released, and it is presumed that he remains hospitalized, awaiting the court's final decision. Now that the full scope of this harrowing case is known, the question remains: will the justice system ultimately bring closure to the Mester family? Or will investigative challenges, mental health complexities, and systemic gaps in firearm regulation leave the truth forever clouded? Deborah and Taylor Meyer first met in southern Indiana through mutual friends and community ties. Both were young adults focused on their careers and futures. Deborah graduated from Jeffersonville High School in 2006 and was pursuing a career in nursing, driven by her natural desire to help others. She was attending 3 institutions: Indiana University Southeast, the University of Louisville, and Ivy Tech, to earn her Bachelor of Science in Nursing, reflecting her dedication and hard work. As their friendship grew, Deborah and Taylor discovered they shared similar values and aspirations, particularly their dreams of building a loving family. They often discussed marriage, children, and a life centered on love and respect. Deborah appreciated Taylor's commitment to being a loving partner and father, which mirrored her own vision of family life. Deborah was strong-willed and adventurous, and she enjoyed the outdoors, traveling, and exploring nature. Her dynamic spirit attracted Taylor, and to outsiders, they appeared to be a deeply loving couple, filled with hope for the future. Deborah and Taylor were excited about their future together as their friendship blossomed into love. In November 2021, they celebrated their wedding, marking the beginning of their journey as husband and wife. Their special day was a testament to their love and shared dreams of family life in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After their marriage, Deborah wholeheartedly embraced her personal and professional life. She had always wanted to be a mother and welcomed their first child in 2020. This indicates that Deborah might have become pregnant before the wedding, which is common for couples committed to starting a family. The birth of their first child brought them immense joy and strengthened their bond as they navigated the challenges of parenthood. Deborah gave birth to her second child in 2022 and her third in 2023, reflecting her desire for a large family. During this time, Deborah also excelled in her nursing career, dedicating herself to caring for others. She received the Daisy Award and was promoted to nurse manager at Wellstone Regional Hospital, recognizing her exceptional skills and compassion over her 15 years of service. Deborah's promotion to nurse manager marked an important milestone in her career, highlighting her leadership skills and clinical expertise. Both her colleagues and patients admired her exceptional abilities, which helped build her reputation as a dedicated and competent nurse. In addition, she successfully juggles the challenges of work while raising 3 young children, demonstrating her extraordinary strength and organizational skills. Above all, Deborah's commitment to her children was unwavering. She poured love, attention, and guidance into nurturing them, shaping their development with care. Friends and family observed how naturally she embraced motherhood, which clearly brought her great joy and fulfillment. She approached parenting with the same dedication she applied to her nursing career. However, after having children, some problems emerged in Deborah and Taylor's seemingly perfect life. The stress of raising 3 young children while both parents worked demanding jobs started to strain their relationship. What once felt like a solid partnership began to show signs of difficulty as they struggled to manage their various responsibilities. One major issue was Taylor's increasing suspicion and jealousy regarding Deborah's friendships and professional relationships. As she advanced in her career and took on more responsibility as a nurse manager, Deborah naturally built stronger working relationships with her colleagues. This development made Taylor uncomfortable, especially concerning her interactions with male colleagues at the hospital. Taylor's trust issues appeared to stem from deeper insecurities he struggled to express or address in a healthy way. He began to misinterpret innocent professional interactions as potential threats to their marriage, leading to a mindset filled with paranoia. Despite Deborah's attempts to reassure him of her commitment and clarify the professional nature of her relationships, matters grew more complicated when Taylor fixated on one specific coworker, He claimed that Deborah had saved this coworker's name in her phone as her best friend. Emily, whether this was true or not, became a catalyst for Taylor's escalating jealousy and suspicion. He convinced himself that this coworker posed a romantic threat to their marriage, disregarding Deborah's explanations of their innocent professional bond. As Taylor's jealousy grew, his behavior changed from being supportive and loving to becoming increasingly controlling and possessive. He began closely monitoring Deborah's movements and questioning her about where she had been and whom she had talked to. This created a tense atmosphere in their home, particularly difficult for Deborah, who valued trust and open communication. The stress of managing Taylor's jealousy while caring for 3 young children and maintaining her demanding career began to take a toll on Deborah. She found herself constantly needing to reassure him about her dedication to their marriage, while also striving to excel as both a mother and a nurse manager. The emotional weight of addressing his insecurities, alongside her other responsibilities, grew increasingly overwhelming. Around this time, Taylor's engagement with his role as a husband and father started to decline. He appeared disconnected from family life, often choosing solitary activities over participating in household duties or spending quality time with his children. This pattern of withdrawal added to Deborah's burden as she navigated her demanding career and managed the majority of domestic responsibilities. Deborah accused her husband, Taylor, of neglecting her and their 3 young children by constantly playing video games. This message, discovered after a tragic incident in Udomurat and IF, highlighted Deborah's dissatisfaction with Taylor's disengagement from family life and his apparent preference for gaming over his responsibilities as a husband and father. The gaming habit became a major source of tension in their home. While Deborah worked long hours at the hospital and took care of their children, Taylor often escaped into video games rather than participating in family life. This disconnection caused her additional stress, as she felt she was essentially raising their children alone while also managing her career. Feeling overwhelmed by Taylor's behavior, Deborah sought support from trusted friends and family. She shared with them how exhausted she was from juggling her job and the rising demands at home. In one message, she expressed her desperation by saying, "Raising 3 kids is exhausting." This message showed her realization that her marriage was not the partnership she had hoped for. She wanted Taylor to be honest about his commitment to their family so she could make informed decisions about their future. Her willingness to consider raising the children on her own revealed her strength and her deep concern for her children's well-being. Despite the growing distance between them and Taylor's concerning behavior, Deborah remained committed to making her marriage work. She was determined to stay by Taylor's side, believing their marriage was worth saving. In December 2023, more than a year before the tragic events that would follow, Deborah bravely confronted Taylor about her suspicions of his infidelity. This conversation exposed significant issues in their marriage and reflected Deborah's increasing worries about Taylor's commitment. The confrontation was emotionally intense, with Deborah expressing feelings of betrayal, while Taylor reacted defensively and dismissed her concerns. Deborah accused him of regularly communicating with another woman and meeting her just before their family took Christmas photos. This accusation indicated that Deborah had found evidence of Taylor's possible infidelity and was attempting to address the issue within their relationship. The timing of these alleged meetings, especially before family photos, would have been particularly painful for Deborah, as it marred cherished family moments. The discovery of potential infidelity further strained their already fragile marriage. Deborah faced the heartbreaking realization that the man with whom she had built a family might not be the committed partner she had thought. This news would have been devastating for someone who had invested so much of herself into their relationship and children. Despite these personal struggles, Deborah continued to thrive in her professional life. Even as her home life became increasingly challenging, her ability to maintain her high work standards illustrated her resilience and dedication. Her colleagues remembered her as a skilled and compassionate worker. Even during an incredibly difficult period in her life, Deborah and Taylor recognized that their marriage was in serious trouble. So they scheduled a marriage counseling session for the 17th of February, 2025. Deborah still believed that their relationship could be saved through professional help and honest communication. she was committed to improving their marriage and healing the damage to their trust and connection. This decision to seek counseling showed that both of them understood their relationship needed assistance. For Deborah, it was another effort to save the marriage she valued. She was ready to openly discuss their issues, hoping to find a way to move forward together. However, in the weeks leading up to counseling, Taylor's jealousy and suspicions intensified. In January 2025, he claimed to have seen a photo of Deborah holding hands with a male colleague at a casino in southern Indiana. Whether real or misinterpreted, this image became an obsession for Taylor, fueling his anger over what he believed was Deborah's betrayal. His fixation on this photograph consumed him, leading him to irrational thoughts that Deborah was having an affair and planning to leave him and their children. Instead of seeing this potential interaction as innocent, his jealousy skewed his perception, leading him to interpret any friendly gesture from Deborah towards her male colleagues as evidence of infidelity. Taylor's inability to trust Deborah or express his concerns healthily created a toxic atmosphere that risked leading to tragedy. As Valentine's Day 2025 approached, Taylor decided to make a significant effort to save their marriage. He planned an elaborate romantic evening to reignite their connection and express his love for Deborah. The theme "Bringing Paris to You" was meant to showcase his dedication and creativity. He bought Deborah a new dress and ordered dinner from a Japanese steakhouse he thought she would like. He even included their 3 young children in the event by having them draw Eiffel Tower pictures for decorations. This family involvement aimed to make the evening special and demonstrated Taylor's intention to create a memorable experience. He wrote a heartfelt card and danced to their wedding song with Deborah. These romantic gestures indicated Taylor's understanding of what would resonate with Deborah and reflected on their shared past. Dancing to their wedding song was particularly meaningful, as it symbolized his desire to rekindle their past happiness. Later, Taylor expressed that he had tried harder than ever to demonstrate his love and commitment to Deborah and their marriage. This statement highlighted his desperation to mend their relationship and his frustration with what he saw as Deborah's lack of appreciation for his efforts. He believed that a romantic evening could resolve deep-seated marital problems, but rebuilding trust and intimacy took a long-term effort. On February 14, 2025, Taylor celebrated Valentine's Day with high expectations. However, when Deborah's response was less enthusiastic than he had expected, he took it as a sign that she was not interested in the marriage. He grew increasingly agitated when she seemed distant during dinner, and his frustration mounted as the evening continued. Deborah's reaction may have reflected the stress of marital conflict, the exhaustion of working and raising 3 children, or simply the realization that romantic gestures alone were not enough to mend the rift in their relationship. Her response was influenced by months of tension, mistrust, and emotional distance that had plagued their marriage recently. The situation escalated quickly after a meal, when an argument broke out between Taylor and Deborah. Taylor accused Deborah of not appreciating his efforts and questioned her commitment to their relationship. The atmosphere became so tense that Deborah decided to leave temporarily to cool off. She got into her Ford Explorer and drove away, needing some time to process what had just happened. Meanwhile, Taylor's anger grew when she left, and he began to suspect that she was meeting a coworker. He thought she was having an affair with a. This suspicion was fueled by the timing of her departure, which coincided with what he assumed was the end of this man's work shift. About 20 minutes later, when Deborah returned home, Taylor was waiting, her suspicions and anger rising. As she went to the bathroom to freshen up, Taylor tried to read her text messages on her smartwatch, searching for proof of what he believed was her betrayal. His jealousy led him to become increasingly invasive and controlling. When Deborah noticed Taylor trying to access her messages, she confronted him about invading her privacy. In response, Taylor demanded to see her cell phone, insisting that she hand it over so he could search through her messages. When Deborah refused, the situation escalated into physical violence with serious consequences. The argument quickly turned into a physical struggle as Taylor tried to forcibly take Deborah's phone from her. In this confrontation, Deborah defended herself by punching Taylor, but he overpowered her and took the phone. With her phone now in his possession, he started to choke Deborah as she pleaded with him to stop. She expressed her fear for her life and concern for their 3 young children who were asleep upstairs, asking him what he was going to do, whether he was going to kill her. As the violent confrontation continued, Deborah attempted to protect herself by hitting Taylor with a water bottle. But this only seemed to fuel his anger. In retaliation, Taylor grabbed a wine bottle and struck Deborah repeatedly in the head until she lost consciousness, leaving her motionless on the floor. Instead of stopping, Taylor's rage took a darker turn. He left her on the floor and went to the kitchen, where he retrieved a large kitchen knife. With the knife in hand, he returned to where Deborah lay helpless and began to repeatedly attack her in the chest and other areas of her body. The attack was brutal and lasted for an extended period of time. The scene was horrific, with blood splattered throughout the room. After the attack, he used Deborah's phone to take a picture of her lifeless body and sent it to a contact labeled her best friend Emily, with the message, "Your fault." The photograph was intended to traumatize the recipient and to place blame for Deborah's death on someone Taylor viewed as responsible for the destruction of his marriage. His actions revealed the depth of his delusion and his inability to accept responsibility for his own violent behavior. In Taylor's distorted thinking, Deborah's death was not the result of his choices, but rather the inevitable consequence of what he perceived as her betrayal. Following the murder, Taylor also sent messages to Deborah's friends and family members, informing them that he had killed her. These communications were sent through text messages and family group chats, creating a horrifying situation for those who received them. While Taylor was sending these messages and taking photographs, the 3 children remained asleep upstairs in their home, unaware that their mother had been murdered and their father had become a killer. One of Deborah's friends, who had received Taylor's disturbing messages, immediately recognized the severity of the situation and contacted the Jeffersonville Police Department. This friend also drove to Deborah's home to assist the officers, demonstrating quick thinking and bravery that potentially prevented an even greater tragedy. When the friend arrived at the house and began speaking with police officers who had responded to the scene, he received the horrifying photograph that Taylor had sent from Deborah's phone. This image confirmed the worst fears about what had happened inside the home and provided officers with crucial information about the situation they were about to encounter. Officers initially attempted to make contact with someone inside the house by knocking on the front door, but they received no response to their efforts. Given the information they had received about the domestic disturbance and the photograph showing what appeared to be a body, police made the decision to breach the front door in an attempt to reach any potential victims inside. As officers prepared to force entry into the home, the garage door suddenly opened and Taylor emerged from inside the house. His behavior toward the responding officers was immediately aggressive and non-compliant, forcing them to use control techniques to subdue him as quickly as possible. The confrontation required additional backup from Indiana State Police, who recognized the intensity of the situation and offered immediate assistance. Once Taylor was safely in custody, officers entered the house and discovered the horrific scene that awaited them inside. Deborah's body was found on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of the brutal attack that had taken her life. The amount of blood and the obvious violence of the crime scene painted a clear picture of what had occurred in the final moments of Deborah's life. Crime scene investigators arrived to begin their meticulous task of collecting every piece of evidence from her home. They meticulously examined every corner of the house, searching for clues that could provide insight into the events that had unfolded that night. The investigators documented the scene thoroughly, taking photographs and collecting samples that would be crucial for the prosecution's case. The evidence collected from the crime scene painted a clear picture of the brutal assault that had taken Deborah's life. The location of blood spatter, the position of her body, and the weapon used in the attack all provided crucial details about how the murder had been carried out. This physical evidence would later corroborate Taylor's own confession about the events of that night. At the police station, Taylor was questioned by investigators about his involvement in the murder of his wife. During these interviews, which were captured on body camera footage, Taylor provided detailed accounts of his actions and motivations on the night of Deborah's death. His willingness to confess and his matter-of-fact description of the violence revealed the extent of his psychological break from reality. After his confession and the conclusion of the initial investigation, Taylor was officially arrested and charged with murder. He was taken to the Clark County Detention Center, where he is being held without bail because of the seriousness of the charges. The court decided to deny bail based on the perceived threat he poses to the community. On the 18th of March, 2025, Taylor Meyer pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. His trial is set to start on the 15th of July, 2025, where he may face a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole for the violent murder of his wife.